this will be different.
Is it? Oh yeah.
This will be different. This is outside of what Michael usually talks about, but I am here for it.
So that's true. That's true. How long have we been hyping this up amongst ourselves and talking about this one?
Probably about 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, I'd say at least three, four.
So
Yeah.
this starts for me. It was interesting how it happened too, right? And I'm going to throw a link to her book in the podcast in the show notes because I really feel like it's a good book for people to read. But it's a book called Nuclear War by a woman named Annie Jacobson. Um, I want to temper that in this conversation
Yeah,
because
you're just into it. We're talking about nuclear war.
we're talking about
You're
nuclear war.
right in.
We're going right in. Look, I don't get to do much often where I don't feel like the stakes are high, right? Now, look, certainly nuclear war, the stakes are high.
Different kind of stakes, right?
But I feel a little more relaxed, like we can just let this riff. So we've been talking about this for a while, but as I was reading that book, you were the one that came to me and said, dude, I think we should do an episode on nuclear war. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, that's interesting because I'm reading a book about it right now. So, dude, I'm jacked for this.
So it's super interesting, right? Like on a certain level, with me, I think probably my earliest. So my dad was in the army, so stuff like this came up.
Sure.
And at one point, maybe it was him, maybe it was someone else. He says something like, and maybe other Mormons have had this thing happen, where it's like, maybe the baptism of fire, the eschatological, end times event, right? Is that a nuclear war when the earth gets baptized by fire? So that's always kind of been in my mind for the majority of my life.
Right.
So I've gone in and out of studying this. My dad moved us to Montana when I was 13 in an effort to get out of the cities. And he talked about that, I don't think that was his big thing. I think it was just stop being in the city and farm, right?
Sure.
But he would talk about how the mountains of the Rockies would keep out the fallout from the West Coast where we used to live.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Block a lot of that.
It's what year were you born?
96.
Okay, 96. Holy crap, I've been married for 1 year when you were born. So I'm a good 20 years older than you are. I still remember drills that we used to have.
I was going to ask you about that.
I remember back in the 80s when I was like in elementary school.
So were you still getting Cold War propaganda and stuff?
Not so much propaganda, but they would run the drills, and they weren't as frequent as, at least they didn't seem as frequent now as I look back. And like if you look at like videos from the 50s and 60s,
right.
Everybody's having
like
those drills,
like duck and cover, like under the desk.
But yeah, it was.
Were you doing that?
Yeah, it was still duck and cover, right?
So no fallout shelter.
No fallout shelter. No. Like we're like, and you think about it, right?
Yeah, you're screwed, dude.
You're screwed. Like, what's the desk gonna do? Teach, right? I mean,
nothing unless you're far enough from the blast zone where all you're getting is broken glass.
Right.
But you need to be leaving that place like soon after that.
Yeah, dude. Like, and I remember doing the drills, right? Like, get under your desk, put your hands over your head. If you got a big textbook, put that over your head. And she's like, now this is just in case there's ever a tornado or an attack, right? She wouldn't even say the words. But like, I remember when the wall comes down, right? And I think for so many people, this seems like ancient history and it would never come back. I was one of those guys, right? Like, there's no way nuclear war is coming back. We defeated Russia, right? That was the great threat.
Sure.
But now
it is in a way too. But no, I see what you mean, right?
Right.
But the things that are concerning and that like tip me off to want to do this, like in the geopolitical realm that we're facing right now, is like, what was the first one? First, we bombed Iran a few months ago. Well, in order to take
it actually goes back to the Biden administration, right? Because we were rattling swords with Russia,
right?
Over
Ukraine.
Yeah, over Ukraine, right? And then it goes to, we're still rattling sabers with them. You had China, who was really saying we're going to take Taiwan.
Mm-hmm, they still are. Yeah.
And then we went ahead,
And this would be the time to do it while we're dealing with Iran.
yeah, and now we just struck Iran, right? And what makes me nervous is that like North Korea is oddly quiet. Um, like there's look, I'm not saying it's gonna happen, right? I'm in fact, if you were to ask me to bet on if it would happen or not, I would probably say probably not. Nonetheless, there's a little bit of stuff out there where I'm like, hmm. And the other thing
It's
is
50-50 for me.
is it 50-50 for
I
you?
think that's where I would at the moment draw the line.
Okay.
I don't know. I think it could go either way.
Okay.
Which I mean, yeah. So that's it's just as likely as it would never happen as it will. So
Right. Right. I tend to think maybe
down the road, when you take maybe not like tomorrow. I don't think it's going to happen like that then, but like things change, right?
look,
Next president, what are the Trump seems to have a good relationship with Putin.
right.
People don't like that. I'm actually okay with it
Right.
for that very reason. You know that like we have
Not blowing ourselves up. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm a
100%,
fan.
hundred
Yeah.
percent.
I'm a fan. And but here's the thing is that they've even scaled now, right? We know that terrorists can build a dirty bomb.
So those are different in a big way. But yes, those are a concern. Those
Right.
are actually a bigger concern in a way that they're more likely,
Right.
but they're not nearly as devastating. Not even
Right,
close.
right. And then, we had an open borders policy for 4 years, right? We didn't know who was coming in, who was going out. Um, we do know that there were enemy combatants that did creep across the border, right? If you listen to certain intelligence analysts, they tell you that there's anywhere between 1,000 to 15,000 terrorists in the country right now. And so you have all this happening, and all of a sudden it's like back on the table,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting too. So here's another dimension not talked about. So yeah, we have us versus Iran, and like Russia and China have been cozy with Iran, right? So like there's tension there. But also there was like a few months ago too, like right after the first bombing of Iran, there was when Pakistan and India started
Yeah.
shooting at each other. And people who don't know this, those are both nuclear nations,
Yes.
and they hate each other.
Yes.
They want to wipe each other off the map.
It is a deep-seated hatred that goes back.
And you think that might not like be a global thing, but then you start, and it was really funny to me. We talked about this at the time, and that's when I think that was around the time I wanted to talk about the pod, when I brought this up. Um, because the implications aren't just India and Pakistan, it's geopolitical with bigger nations because Russia has really good economic ties with India and China does with Pakistan. And
Yep.
so that puts those two at odds with each other. And that's a theater of war that we don't want. Like, I don't know if we don't have to worry about it, but we definitely don't think about it.
Right.
But I actually think that's almost more likely down the road to happen than Russia versus us. A China versus Russia nuclear war, I think, is on the table.
Look, here's the thing, right? We're in a strange place where the major powers involved aren't having a hot war. What we're doing is we're using vassal states,
Hmm.
right? And I do think that there's always a possibility that we get drawn in
Uh-huh.
to some of those wars, right, through our vassal states.
It's possible for sure, but they're neighbors, and there's really interesting things like Russia has a better attack vector on us than China does.
Right.
Because they could send nukes over the North Pole, like their bases are closer to us,
Mm-hmm.
and their missiles will be harder to detect and like
Yep.
respond to. But the vector that China has to take, I've read some stuff that's like we can intercept those things way easier.
Yes.
Uh,
Because they got to fly
and
farther.
and
Yeah.
their tech isn't as good
Right.
either. But if there was, I would worry if I was Russia, and they probably do think about stuff like this. If we went to war with each other, China could nuke Russia to take over, like and expand north into
But didn't they
Siberia,
just
and
sign a pact a
they
year or
don't.
so ago?
They might have, but it don't matter at a certain level. And there's been interesting political tensions there since like the Sino-Soviet split, because like back in the 60s or 70s, it was either right before the death of Stalin or right after. Back when it was, you had Soviet Russia, which was communist, but then you had the Communist Party in China. But ideologically, they were not getting along because
Gotcha.
they interpreted the doctrine differently. And so there's kind of been some there's been a split between the two ever since then, and so they talk now like they're buddies,
but it's still
but
there.
there's still stuff, and it goes beyond just like how do we interpret Marx at this point, right? Because I don't really think there's a lot of Marxists in Russia anymore. They're well past that and onto different stuff.
Funny how
And
starvation
it's
does that to
interesting.
a people.
Well, it's interesting. China isn't either. They're Marxist in name, but they're a mixed economy. You
Right.
know,
They're communist at home, and then
yeah,
they're
they're trying to run the world through
markets
markets and
on
capitalism.
yeah, markets and capitalism on the international stage, right?
Yeah, and then you have special atomic, yeah, special atomic zone and auto,
Autonomous.
autonomous zones, special autonomous zones. Thank you. Like Guangzhou is one city. It's by Hong Kong, and Hong Kong was considered one too. They're SARs, or is what they are. There's several of them, and that's like what keeps them not just like in equilibrium, but like progressing.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, so it's oddly back on the table again, right? Like honestly, there were times, like I remember right after 9/11 happened, I was like, this sucks, this is horrible,
Hmm.
but at least it's not nuclear war, right? Like I remember looking at my kids going, well, they'll never have to worry about that. And it's odd to find ourselves back here at this place again with this on the table.
Oh, sure, sure, it is. Yeah, no, it's been on my mind for, like I said, most of my life. Like, is that the way that the Earth is going to be cleansed? What are your thoughts? Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, no, I look, there's some things, especially through the Taylor revelation, where,
Oh yeah, I know the one you're talking about.
yeah, where it's pretty nasty,
Like the
right?
zombie apocalypse one.
Yeah, where, you have, he calls it a badge of mourning. And some people have thought that maybe that is like a biohazard sign or maybe even a nuclear fallout sign, right? That there were badges of mourning on the doors.
Right.
And it gets gruesome actually. Like that is one revelation, quite frankly, that is a horror show.
It is. No, yeah, exactly. That's yeah. Why I think it was Sean or maybe it was Moroni who said it. Yeah, it's like the zombie apocalypse revelation is what they call it. There's no zombies in it for those who don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah,
But it is horror. It's a horror show as you say.
it's a horror show. Yeah, I mean, I won't burden anybody with the gruesome details here, but it's essentially cannibalism at
Yeah.
the end, right?
Right.
And so you can't help but not take that off the table, right? Because in a full-on nuclear exchange, right? And that's the other thing I want to talk about before we get going too far here is that there's many scenarios to this. There's not just
Yeah,
like
that's true.
one, right?
Yeah.
Um, Certainly it can be a scenario where you empty the arsenals, right? A lot of that stuff is kind of on a dead man switch. Um, I honestly think that at least certainly the first strike would be a tactical nuke, right? Try to minimize damage as much as you can,
Well, it would
unless,
also minimize response. A
right,
tactical nuke would minimize the severity of the retaliation.
right, right. And I'm sure we'll get into all that here. Kind of the options are all on the table. I think I'm going to go ahead and throw a link into the nuke map that you and I played
Oh,
with.
you should. That's a fun thing to play with.
That's darkly fun, but
Yeah.
fun. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, no, absolutely. So I'll throw in a link to that as well. But yeah, no, I think that pretty well sets the table for what we're doing. So if you got young children, probably maybe turn this down or turn it off until they're in bed, just so you don't scare the crap out of them. Because look, that's the other thing. As a kid growing up in that time, like there was a movie that was made, I want to say it was 84. I could be wrong. It had Jason Robards in it. It was called The Day After.
Okay.
And it followed what would happen after a nuclear exchange. Scared me to death, bro. Like way scared me to death. Um, and I was like, I had nightmares for a week
What's it called?
afterwards.
They have to look at
The day
the
after
day
tomorrow.
after.
You can find it on YouTube. I'll throw that link in there too. You can find it on YouTube and watch it. I rewatched it again, and it's pretty brutal, right? It's pretty brutal. It follows a couple of families in the Midwest as a nuclear exchange happens. And yeah, so if you got young kids, gauge their maturity level and if they're ready for this.
Sweet. So this book that I brought, it's Nuclear War Survival Skills, the 2022 edition. It's pretty good. It was updated in 2022 because of the Ukraine war conflict, but the first edition was 79, I want to say, and the second one was 87, I
Gotcha.
want to say. But I found this because I was looking at the All Red group. You ever heard of Gems bookstore?
No.
It's I don't know if it's like, I mean, it is the All Red group, but I don't know if it's like, it started off, I think more, maybe it started off as more of a private enterprise by one of the guys,
Okay.
but they do carry a lot of spiritual material. And
Right.
this was on the list, the catalog that I saw, and
Ooh,
it was on
no.
my radar ever since, and I just bought it. I didn't buy it from them, but I found it on
Right.
Amazon or whatever, right?
So what you're saying is some author somewhere owes being able to send their kids to college.
Well, it was probably George E. Maycock. Have you ever heard that name before?
Uh-uh.
George E. Maycock was he's the one who started GEMS. He was an apostle on the council in the AUB, and GEMS stands for George E. Maycock and Sons,
Oh, okay. All right.
and so it was his bookstore. And
Okay.
Sean thought the guy was pretty cool. He was an interesting personality. I think he kind of is, yeah. And I don't know what the temperature on him is now in the group. I've never been there, right? So
Disclaimer.
disclaimer, right? I don't know what people think of him, but it's pretty. I think his reputation was pretty split and controversial. Like people either loved him or hated him,
Gotcha.
even on the council. Like I'm
Gotcha.
not saying he was a Joe Thompson, Bill Baird kind of a guy, but
Right.
I think he did rub shoulders maybe the wrong way sometimes with the other guys. But he was extremely intelligent,
Okay.
and probably even to the point of like lacking the brotherly, fatherly kind of, priestly thing. Like,
Gotcha.
and so that rubs people the wrong way when you're in leadership, right? If you're just the hyper intelligent guy.
Right. And you don't
Yeah.
temper that with some love and some
Yeah.
personality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're just the bookworm. Yeah.
Yep. I
Yeah.
gotcha.
And so that seems like that's kind of the vibe I get. And I apologize if I'm not getting, I never met the guy. So
Right.
that's just how I remember being told what he was like. So, but yeah, so this book is pretty cool. We're gonna dive into some stuff. It starts off with it's pretty interesting, like myth busting.
Okay. So what are some of the popular myths?
That's a good question. Let's dive into that real quick.
Because look, I think
I don't think we need to go through them extensively, but
no, I do think, look, I do think that because we all have perceptions, right?
uh-huh,
Largely placed on us by Hollywood,
100%
right? And
Cold
so
War propaganda.
Cold
Even
War propaganda,
yeah,
go
mutually
down the
assured
list.
destruction.
Right, all
There's
those
no
things.
way to survive this.
Right, yeah. And that's something else to say too, right? Is that certainly it could absolutely be the end of everything, but also it's a little more survivable than what
So yeah,
what people have led on.
this book's whole premise is it's very survivable. It's
Right.
very optimistic as long as you're prepared.
Yeah.
And there are ways to prepare, obviously, and this book's all about that. And yeah, it's all about debunking the myths from the get-go of that don't even bother to prepare.
Gotcha.
It's very survivable. The toxicity even of the events are far um, exaggerated.
Okay.
But yeah, so like one myth: fallout radiation from a nuclear war would poison the air and all parts of the environment. It would kill everyone. Right? That's one myth. Um, Fallout radiation penetrates everything, and there's no escaping its deadly effects. That's another myth. Another one. A heavy nuclear attack would set practically everything on fire, causing firestorms in cities that would exhaust the oxygen in the air, and all shelter occupants would be killed by intense heat. Uh, Myth. In the worst hit parts of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where all buildings were demolished, everyone was killed by blast radiation or fire. It's not true.
Wow.
Some people, as close to a third of a mile away from ground zero who were in normal bomb shelters from normal air raids survived.
Really?
Yeah.
Whew.
So there's two kinds of shelters we'll talk about. And there's fallout shelters and there's blast shelters.
Right.
And they're built differently. And so blast shelters will help you with short-term survival, like from the actual blast, just and they don't have to be fallout proof, but they
Right.
will save you. And you can make one, a rudimentary one, in 24 hours.
Really?
Yeah, 100%. And there's chapters on this, how to make it.
Okay.
Anyway, then there's fallout shelters more long term, how to filter your air, how to survive the radiation. The idea with the former, the blast shelter being you survive the blast, but you got to get out and move
Right.
right before you get the lethal dose.
Right.
Um, a Russian nuclear attack on the United States would completely destroy all American cities. That's a myth. Another myth. So much food and water will be poisoned by fallout that people will starve and die even in fallout areas where there's enough food and water. Another one. Most of the unborn children and grandchildren of people who have been exposed to radiation from nuclear explosions will be genetically damaged, will be malformed, and delayed victims of nuclear war.
Okay.
So we have evidence from like the Marshall Islands and stuff and other events, nuclear events, where people were exposed to high doses of radiation, but there's been no observable degenerative effects on their posterity any more than like normal degenerative effects in the population already.
Okay. So let me ask you this question then.
Sure.
Because didn't some folks in Chernobyl end up, wasn't there a disproportionate amount of people that had cancer afterwards?
I never looked up Chernobyl for this project.
Okay.
Is this not nuclear war?
And look, that's a little different, right? That is
but
a meltdown, not a
Right, but yeah, I figured that would be brought up in this, but I never saw anything on in this book on that.
interesting.
And even if it
Okay.
was cancer, it wouldn't. Did it affect the children of those people? Like
Right.
that's a different question, right?
Right. Yeah. No, totally.
Yeah, because there's like all those sci-fi B movies from the 50s and 60s,
Oh,
right, where it's
yeah.
like mutant children and
Well, that's how Godzilla got
or
its
even
start, right? I mean,
even not even humans, but like the animal life, like giant ants and
yeah,
you
that's
know,
where Godzilla, the hypothesis of Godzilla came from,
right.
right? Was an animal that was mutated because of the blast off the Marshall Islands, right? And no, it is riddled with myth.
Yeah. So yeah, it's things like that, are essentially the things that the book starts with. Um, that being said, where do we want to start?
While you look that up, I'll just talk here for a second. I think it's important to realize that so many of these systems now are automated
Okay.
that it doesn't take much. In that book I referenced, Nuclear War by Annie Jacobson, she talks about actual scenarios where the machines took over, kind of, right? So let me give you an
Like
example.
Skynet and Terminator.
In the documentary Terminator, no, but
Dude, we're going there with animals. I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
no, one of the things was there was actually a massive flock of geese that were coming out of Canada,
Okay.
northern Canada, up by the Arctic Circle. Our system's armed.
Oh, okay.
When our system's armed, somehow Russia knows and we know when
When
each other's systems begin to arm,
sure.
right? Well, Russia sees our systems go online, their
So there's the
systems go online,
naturally.
right? And it's kind of this build up moment. And it was actually the Russian guy who went, we can't let this happen. Stop the sequence. And so they manually override it and they wait. And someone finally has kind of the cojones to be like, get the Americans on the line.
Uh-huh.
Talk to the Americans. And the Americans go, yeah, we just noticed that. We thought you guys were firing something. He's like, not us, right? So they actually scramble up a fighter jet, and it's a flock of geese.
Hmm.
But that just shows you how automated all of this is, right? And so that's another component of it. And so I the reason I say that is like, look, this doesn't have to actually be a wartime scenario,
To set
right?
it off. Sure.
to set it off because the systems are automated. Um,
Scary.
yeah, it is scary, right? And look, we know that the president does have a briefcase around him at all times called the football, right?
Yeah.
Um, but the misnomer is that the president has to be the one to initiate it. That's not true either, right?
Interesting.
He does have to initiate it to do to empty the vault, so to speak, right, of every weapon we got. But there's even contingencies in case he went down that those things just roll through automation.
And they should. Realistically, they should.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying they shouldn't, because look, as much as I would like to be altruistic and just say, you know, let's not do it, someone kills my family with one, I'm like, most likely I'm gonna be like, get them.
So there's a funny movie. I'm gonna make a plug for it right now. It's from like 1964 or whatever, and it's got a really weird title, but it's a Mel Brooks and Stanley Kubrick film. It's so darn funny. But
Doctor Strangelove.
it's Doctor Strange. The full title of the movie is Doctor Strangelove and How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Atomic Bomb.
Dude, I gotta watch that still. I have, in full disclosure, I've never watched that.
It is such a good movie. I think it is anyways, but I went and watched it. I think I was probably 19 or 20. Maybe I was 18. No, it was after that. I was 18 when I first watched it. And I went home once and made my brother watch it with me. And he was like, "What did I just watch?" And I just hyped it up to this point. But it's like it's from 1964 and it's just a different kind of humor, different kind of style. It's offbeat. It's like the genre is black comedy.
Okay.
You know, not in the racial sense, but it's like
Right.
really dismal,
Right. Gallows
negative,
humor. Yeah.
gallows humor kind of stuff. And but the premise is there's a general, there's a U.S. Army general he's a war hawk and he wants to set off a war with Russia, and he commandeers a U.S. Air Force base or whatever. And he gets the some of the bombers, the fighter pilot bombers, to go off on a mission, and you know they go fly, they get their orders and they're off flying, and everyone's trying to make this, take control of the base back and like stop the bombers before it happens, and the Russians learn about it and they send a diplomat over, and he's like in the Pentagon, and yeah, like this was a rogue guy, right? It's doing this, like no one wants this war, but then like it comes to this disclosure that, well, Russia's made it so that everything's like on a dead man switch.
Yeah.
And so like everyone, the Russians and the Americans, are like trying to stop this, because if one of the bombers drop a bomb, then Russia's going to retaliate with everything,
Yep.
with like this massive doomsday device too. It's not just nukes, but they've got this doomsday device that's going to just destroy the world, you know. And it's just a really funny movie.
As you explained the movie to me when we were first talking about this, the first thing I thought of was it sounded like a Hunter S. Thompson novel.
I'm
Right.
not familiar with who that is.
Okay, so Hunter S. Thompson was a guy, he was a guy who invented a type of journalism called gonzo journalism.
Okay.
And look, in full disclosure, he wasn't necessarily a moral man, right? Um, but nonetheless, some of his literature has some pretty interesting things to it. Um, Popular books would be like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, that sort of stuff, where it almost feels like a fever dream at
Okay.
times. So,
Yeah. Yeah, there's some elements of that. But yeah, it's a hilarious movie in my opinion. But it's definitely dated. And
right,
it's not like my generational humor, but I was raised in a way where I kind of appreciated older things.
sure.
In any case, let's start with the facts since we went through some myths. Okay. Um, the first one that we talked about, radiation poisoning the air and the environment. The facts are radiation from an atom bomb doesn't poison the air in all parts of an environment. When a nuclear weapon detonates close enough to the ground, so there's two types of strikes.
There's a ground
There's a
strike.
ground strike and there's an air burst.
Right.
And so when during a ground strike or a air strike that's close enough to the ground, the nuke makes a fireball.
Right.
And if the fireball touches the ground, um, thousands of tons of earth are from the crater are pulverized into trillions of particles that are contaminated by the explosion. These particles are carried up into the atmosphere by the superheated cloud,
The mushroom
the
cloud.
mushroom cloud, which is super hot. It's like hotter than the sun, or the fireball is, right?
Right.
And so yeah, that's why it mushrooms, right? It's because heat rises and
Yep.
it's dragging everything from the earth from the crater and throwing it up into the sky, right? So the airburst isn't going to be a mushroom cloud,
No.
right? Um, the radioactive particles from the surface then fall out of the sky.
Okay.
That's what
Yep.
nuclear fallout is. They fall out of the mushroom cloud back to the earth. The heavy chunks fall close to ground zero. Makes sense,
Right.
right? Anything that's bigger than say here, really anything that's more than that's not invisible to the eye, right,
Right.
is gonna
Fall back to
fall
the earth.
back to ground zero practically. And the fine particles will be dispersed and blown by the wind, and some of them are so light that they will remain in the atmosphere for years.
Phew.
That's actually not a bad thing, but
No.
because they're going to be so high in the air and they're so spread out
Right.
that they're not going to do any damage, and by the time they do fall out,
They're gonna half
the
life.
half life several times
Right.
before they get down.
So they're at that point harmless when they come back to the ground.
Practically harmless. Yeah. Uh, the half life, which is the rate of decay of the toxicity of these particles, is rapid at first, and then it gets longer and longer for each half life. It
Gotcha.
takes longer. Um, Only high fallout areas close to ground zero will be as high or over 1,000 rontgens an hour. So, do
Okay.
you know what a rontgen is?
Yeah,
That's the measurement, right?
that's the measurement where they measure that decay to determine the half life.
So the Cold War era estimates for a targeted area immediately after an attack would be between 600 and 1,000 rontgens an hour.
Okay.
And so what did it say? It said only high fallout areas close to ground zero will be as high or over 1,000 rontgens an hour.
Okay.
And then it would be 500 after one half life, right?
Right.
And then 250 after the next, and so forth
So
and
it
so
just
on.
whittles down quickly.
At first, right? So each half life takes longer than the previous half life.
Right.
Uh, if the dose rate of the radiation 1 hour after an explosion is 1,000 rontgens an hour, it would take about 2 weeks for the dose rate to be reduced to 1 rontgen an hour.
Okay.
So, and I've read this in other books before.
1,000 to 1.
1,000 to 1 is 2 weeks.
Wow.
It's not bad actually.
No, that decays pretty quickly.
That's
Actually.
not bad at all.
Yeah.
And so, if you had a fallout shelter, or even I mean, if you have a blast shelter that isn't able to withstand the radiation, you need to get out. But if you have a fallout shelter and you're close to ground zero, you can stay if you like, have 2 weeks of food or whatever, and then it's going to be safe enough for you to get out of there.
Right.
You can according to this book, a healthy individual can receive between 3 to 6 rontgens a day for 2 weeks straight without any permanent
Okay.
health, defects or, liability or death, and that your body can't heal. Right.
Okay. So
So
after 2 weeks, you would kind of
yeah,
be
one an
clear.
hour, like yeah, get a few hours to get out of the area, right? Or whatever
Right.
it takes you to get. So yeah, you can have 3 to 6 a day for two at least 2 weeks straight
Now I
without
know
permanent
that those
damage.
bombs that that's going to depend on the yield of the bomb as well, right?
The fallout, well, the only difference between the yield is the diameter from ground zero to the outreach to the perimeter of the blast will be greater. The radiation amount isn't going to be
Okay.
higher. I don't think it's just the fact that the blast radius is bigger.
Gotcha. Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So you have more distance to travel to get out.
So that's something that you would have to account for if you had to hike out of somewhere like that,
Right.
right?
And so yeah, we'll cover some of the distances between like smaller common yield bombs and like the bigger ones as
Okay.
well. But it's like 50 to 60 miles on the biggest bombs ever tested, like the radius from center to the outside of the circle of the blast zone. It's like a 60-mile radius at the most. But no one uses bombs that big anymore.
Right.
No,
Right.
Russia's the ones that had it. Like we never tested bombs that big. Russia is the one that's developing that, but they don't even use those
Gotcha.
anymore. Uh, the radiation dose that will kill people also varies greatly. A dose of about 450 roentgens to the whole body will kill about half of those who receive it. Though some studies suggest that half of those with a dose of 350 within a few days would die. The human body can repair most radiation damage if it's not too high. A person, yeah, we cover that. There is a myth that radiation penetrates everything. Gamma radiation from fallout will penetrate shielding materials and reach occupants. However, a halving thickness, um, which a halving thickness is the amount of shielding to reduce the dose of radiation by half, is equivalent to 3.6 inches of packed earth or 2.4 inches of concrete.
Okay.
So five layers of halving thickness will reduce gamma rays to 1/32 of its normal
All right.
potential. 10 layers will be 1 over 1024 of its normal penetration.
At that point, it's pretty much
So
darn near undetectable, right?
so 10 layers of halving thickness of concrete would be uh, 24 inches plus a quarter inch,
Right.
you know, 2 feet.
Okay. It's
and
really not that
and that you're
much.
getting 1 out of 1,024 of the whatever's coming
Right.
from the outside. So if it's 1,000 roentgens an hour, you're getting one. You're getting less than one roentgen an hour
Right.
there. But if it's less, you're getting nothing practically, right?
Right.
Uh, here this I thought this was interesting too. On a clear day, thermal pulses from an airburst detonation of a 1 megaton device can cause second-degree burns to people who are 10 miles away.
Wow. That's quite a ways.
Yeah, that is. That's on a clear day. So that's like the climate of Utah on a summer clear day versus Missouri. So,
Right.
that's interesting because humidity and like cloud cover and thing like, or like a place like Seattle too,
Right.
it's going to completely change
The
the that kind of attack. Yeah, your burn, the quality of burn you get, the flash will not be
mm,
as devastating in other areas as it will be in a desert or low humidity clear day
okay.
type of area.
So in your opinion, after your reading, what's worse, an airburst or a ground detonation?
Depends. A ground detonation is roughly twice the damage as a ground detonation
Okay.
as far as surface area. But the bonus part to a surface burst is there's no fallout. The minimal fallout.
Airburst, you mean,
The
right?
airburst. The airburst, because it's not touching the ground, the only things that can fall out, the only particles it's getting in the fireball is the parts of the bomb itself.
Right.
And yeah, that's a nothing compared to a massive crater that's getting kicked up into the atmosphere, right?
But EMP is something we'd have to still worry about.
EMP is something you have to worry about with either.
Right,
By
but
the
it
way,
doesn't it spread more on an
it,
air
it
detonation?
does spread more on an air detonation, and the blast damage is twice as much than a ground burst with an
Okay.
air detonation, but there's no fallout.
Gotcha.
So that's
Gotcha.
the plus side to an air burst.
So you don't have to worry about all the contamination and that sort of thing. You're just look, I had a and look, EMP is scary too, right?
It
And
is.
EMP, for those who don't know, stands for electromagnetic pulse. And when I was working back east, I had moved out to the East Coast right after Katrina happened, Hurricane Katrina.
Hmm.
And we picked up, I worked for a big conglomerate, right? Had engineers, architects, they even had their own like dirt moving equipment and builders and everything. And we got hired to go down to Louisiana to into New Orleans and do some of the surveying on the levees because they build those levees in what are called lifts, right? So one lift would be a certain kind of dirt, the other would be like some concrete, then some riprap, and then on and on. And so we had to verify that they were getting the proper amount of lifts um per thing per layer. And when I was down there, I became friends with a guy who worked for FEMA.
Okay.
And we went out to dinner one night, and he had a few drinks in him. And I thought, okay, this is my chance to ask some questions because he's not going to hold anything back. A little bit of opportunism there on my part.
Sure.
But I asked him, I said, what's your nightmare scenario? He said EMP. I mean, he didn't hesitate. And I was like, what's EMP? And he tells me about it. And I said, well, why is that your nightmare scenario? The power just goes out. He's like, yeah, but you don't get it. He's like, we don't have the ability to manufacture our own transformers anymore. Those all come from China.
Right.
He said, you're looking at perhaps, and maybe you found something different in the book, but he was like 80% casualties. I'm like, shut up. He's like, no. He's like, do the math. He's like, how many people right now are on life-saving equipment? Oxygen, blood transfusions, those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Quite a few. Okay, those people are dead almost immediately, right? You don't get your dialysis for 2 weeks, you're done.
Right.
Then you go into how many people are on life-saving medication, chemo, blood pressure, heart medications. Again, go down the list, right? Those people are going to die. And then he went into now you have the problems of people having to leave the cities, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
water's not going to work, sewer's not going to
Right.
work. All those things that we've come to rely on are done.
Right.
Um, and so it painted a pretty grim picture.
So
So
it's mass death because it reverts us back to the Stone Age, and people don't know how to live in the Stone Age.
we're going back to the 1800s, right? Early
So
1800s.
yeah, EMP will. So my understanding is correctly, and I don't know if this is covered in the book. It probably is, but I never got to it. No, but EMP will basically fry anything that has a microchip or a circuit board.
Yes,
If it's got a circuit board or microchips, it ain't gonna work. And so your cars ain't gonna work, your computers ain't gonna work unless they're very, very, very special computers that are
right,
meant for that kind of. They're ruggedized.
right, yep.
Um, so I think there's some diesel trucks that will work that we still make.
I had heard anything pre 1973.
And anything, yeah, there's that. As far as gas, yeah, if it has a carburetor, you're good, pretty
Yep.
much. If your car has a carburetor. So if you got some classic American muscle that hasn't been transfigured into the modern, age of plastic and silicone and stuff that we have now, then you're good, probably.
And that's why boys and girls in Mad Max, they all drove muscle cars.
That's great, great movie, by the way.
Yes.
I love those. Yeah, so yeah, some diesel trucks and your cars older than 1973 will work.
Right. Yep. Yep.
Because there's no computers in them.
You're
Yeah,
right.
but now computers run everything.
Everything. Everything. No, 100%.
And the cool thing about diesel is you can make biodiesel,
Right.
and like you can, and animal waste and plant waste, you can distill it down to
Absolutely.
biofuel that diesel engines will work. I mean, you can try it on a gas car. It'll probably work for like maybe a little bit, but it's gonna ruin
Oh, it's going to ruin that motor. Yeah.
it. Right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, a gas car won't really handle
Yeah.
that.
No. No. Interesting. Anyway, sorry to take us down a side tangent.
No, we're good to go any way we want. Let's see. In a full theoretical Soviet exchange envisioned around 1979, yeah, the radiation in bad areas was estimated to be between 600 and 1,000 Rontgen an hour. And you do not generally want to get more than 3 Rontgens a day,
Okay.
right? But like I said, you can get up to 6 for 2 weeks and still be fine. Now, this is interesting. I thought this was interesting, anyways. 100 Rontgens, a dose of 100 Rontgens is called LD1, which means, or 1%, which means lethal dose 1%. At 100, at a 100 Rontgen dose, 1% of the population who receive that dose will die.
Whew.
Statistically.
That's still a lot of people.
It is of those that receive the dose, right? Yeah,
Right.
1% of those that receive a 100 Rontgen dose will die. It's not terrible though.
No, now you put it from those who receive it. Right. Yeah.
Around that, also interestingly enough, Around that dose is where you start to lose your hair from radiation poisoning.
Okay.
So if you see signs that you're losing your hair, it's falling out. Doesn't
Run.
necessarily doesn't no, it doesn't necessarily mean you're dying. You have potentially a 99% chance that you'll still live when
A
your hair's
99%
yeah, because
chance?
LD1 is the dose that your hair starts falling out. But 99% of people,
Oh.
only 1% of people that get, with that dose die. You therefore, unless you've gotten more than that, right? But if you don't know, if you don't have a way to measure it, and you start losing your hair, right? And if you know that, like, oh, but, I might still have a 99% chance of living still, which is
Right.
interesting. I didn't,
Right. Yeah. No.
I didn't know that. I thought it was, you start losing your hair. I've heard that you're dead.
Yeah,
You're
you're
dead.
done.
You're
Right.
dead walking, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, let's see. Getting a dose of 600 to 1000 Rontgens is pretty much LD 100. And this is the scary thing about this. Even though if you have a dose that high and you have LD 100, it still might take you months to die.
See, and
And you're dead walking.
that to me is the scariest part of the whole thing because you can't taste it, can't
Yep.
smell it, can't feel it, right? It's kind of like hope this isn't it, right? But the effects of that are devastating.
They are.
I again back to that book that I had read. She went through the gnarly details of some folks that had died from being exposed to that. And ooh, that was enough, I think, that you would probably wish that the bomb fell on top of you.
Probably. I got some of those details right here. So what it does, radiation kills your bone marrow.
Yes.
And without bone marrow, you can't make new red blood cells. And red blood cells can live for about 120 days. So that gives you 3 months.
Right.
4 months. Gives you 4 months. After they die, they will be excreted through fecal material. And without new red blood cells to carry oxygen throughout your body, you'll die.
Yep.
So you're going to suffocate from the inside out,
Oh.
and you're going to crap out all your old red blood cells.
Oh. And see, this is where I tend to look at this sort of stuff like nuclear weapons and that sort of thing. And it brings up that old adage, just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should. Um, in the book that I had read, she had talked about liquefaction of certain organs, if you were really close, right? But far enough away outside the blast zone to live. Like it's a little spooky.
Sure.
Um, Certainly not a way I'd want to go.
No, no.
I can think of 1,000 other ways that sound way more pleasant than that.
I agree with that. 100%. So the bombs that we dropped, the two of them that we dropped on Japan were 15 kilotons.
Okay.
That's pretty small, actually. So a kiloton would be 1,000 tons of dynamite equivalent would be the
Right.
equivalent, and a megaton is 1,000 kilotons.
Phew.
So a 20 kiloton weapon on an airburst at optimum altitude will destroy or severely damage buildings 1.42 miles from ground zero. So that's your blast radius.
One and a half miles. Yep.
1.5 miles on a 20 kiloton device. A 20 megaton weapon under the same conditions would destroy or damage houses at a distance of 16 miles from the radius from ground zero to the outside of its blast zone.
16 miles. Wow.
Yeah, and the 50 megaton was like 60.
Still a lot of area.
It is.
I'm blanking on how many square miles that would be, but it'd be a lot.
Mm-hmm. That's destroyer damage, right? So it's like, is that talking about even to the point of like, so on the nuke maps thing, for example, that you're going to link to, it has like tiers,
Right.
and it's like the what level of damage for what zone, right? And so like the outside of the blast, all you're getting in the blast damage is broken glass
Right.
on a certain level, right? Um, Things aren't going to necessarily catch on fire. Walls aren't going to come tumbling down unless they're
Right.
not structurally sound already. right?
Mm-hmm.
Roof's probably not going to cave in on your head. But those are the only places where ducking under your desk would help.
Right,
You
right, 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 right. Totally.
know, in the early Cold War, Soviet missiles were in the high megaton range, 20 to 50 megatons, because their missiles at the time were not accurate. And so the game was, if we can't hit the target with precision,
Carpet bomb.
we're just gonna carpet bomb.
Yep.
And things are far more accurate, and so you don't have to put as big of warheads, which are less expensive and less room.
Right.
You know,
Easier to get across the ocean.
yeah. So the most common weapon in the Russian nuclear arsenal is the SS-18 multi-warhead missile. Each missile is armed of those, those kind of missiles are armed with 10 500 kiloton weapons each.
Okay.
So they're called MIRVs. It's a
Right.
multiple independent reentry vehicle. You ever heard of those?
No.
So it's like a shotgun, but with nukes, and there's 10 buckshot,
Yeah, I think of the word Merv like your buddy. Hey, Merv's coming over. We're gonna
right.
go ahead and have a
No,
barbecue.
Merv is not our buddy.
Right.
But you got 10-ish. So yeah, the missile will arc over, it'll take its flight path, and it'll separate, and then each of
Okay.
the payload will be 10 or plus.
I've seen the
Some
schematic. Okay,
the
yeah.
warheads will then have independent targets that they can guide or launch towards from that once the missile
Wow.
separates. And so one missile in Russia, the SS-18s, will have 10 500 kiloton bombs.
So they can hit 10 targets off one missile.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, we're going to get back to that in a second. There's pros and cons to that, by the way.
So what kind of flight? Well, we'll get back to it. It's fine. Go ahead.
Um, the MIRVs started, actually, they're an older tech than I thought they were. We started experimenting with them in the 60s, by the way.
Okay.
Um, and we started deactivating ours in the 90s for some reason. Russia still has theirs.
Why would we do that?
So the evidence I could see was there's a difference in tactics. First off, like I said, there's a trade-off, and we picked one side, and the Russians picked the other side on that. But when we were updating our weapon systems, the missiles we had were they the Pershings? They weren't the Pershings. They were the Peacemakers. They were harder to maintain, and certain things that we were doing made it like unfeasible software or hardware wise to maintain them
Okay.
as well. And so
Just outdated.
outdated and economical. But our point of view was if we have 10 warheads on a missile and there's one missile in one missile silo, if they hit that first, we lose 10 warheads
Gotcha.
if they strike first. And so therefore, if we have more silos and less warheads for each missile,
I see.
we don't lose as much in a first strike.
Gotcha. It's a numbers game, right? We keep more of our arsenal.
And their strategy is, well, if they hit one of ours, well, they have fewer silos than us,
Right.
and so there's more about instead of building more silos, how many bombs can we fit on what we do have?
Right. Okay, that makes sense. That tracks.
Um, However, in 1990, the CIA stated that the SS-18 Mod 5 can fit 14 to 20 warheads to one missile.
Holy crap.
Although it is assumed that the warheads would have a smaller yield on that kind of a device.
Okay, so let me ask you this. When we start doing calculations, right? Russia, United States has this many nuclear weapons. Russia has this amount of nuclear weapons. Are they counting missiles or are they counting warheads?
So my understanding, I don't know, what I got off of some research, and I don't know. I mean, maybe we all have secret stuff, for example, right?
Sure.
We're not telling the other guys,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
We've gone through like 3 series of treaties since the 1990s, and I think we have an equal amount
Okay.
of nukes right now, and like basically the way, although that treaty expired in February, by the way, this February,
Awesome.
the New START treaty. Uh,
Awesome. Yeah. Great.
and so like yeah, the doomsday clock moved the closest it's ever been to doomsday, like a month ago,
But that's just because of that treaty.
because the treaty expired, and although Putin has expressed interest to not only sign another one, but he also stated that they will continue to essentially just keep
De-escalate.
no, not even just de-escalate, but keep the status quo
Okay.
essentially. Despite the fact that the treaty, if you can believe these things, right? That's what's been stated.
Look, I want to say this. Mutually assured destruction did work.
Sure.
Right? I mean, because nobody really wins in an exchange like that, right? I mean, unless you hit first and they know the other guy can't get a shot
It
off,
is all about that first strike. Yeah,
right?
100%.
Um, but again, everything's so automated now, right? I don't see you being able to get out of you doing a first strike without the other guy knowing about it, right? Look, if we were to hit a small country that didn't have tech, sure. But if we're dealing with another big boy on the block,
So the advantage we have with first strike, if we were to do one, is our submarines
right,
are better than theirs,
right,
and it's a lot easier and quicker to if we have ships in the Arctic Circle,
er,
already, or um, in the Bering Strait or wherever, that's close to the shores, and they can fire their bombs
and
right into
China and
Russia.
Russia has those too, right? I
They do.
mean,
They do
yeah,
have theirs.
yeah,
Yep. Yep.
yeah. I was just gonna say, I think mutually assured destruction did do its job, right? It definitely kept everybody from doing stupid stuff for the most part.
Right. Yes, it did. And the interesting thing is, I think a big part of why this hasn't happened, and the reason why it would continue to not happen, is if the status quo stays, is everyone's so economically tied up. No one has
Yeah,
self-sufficiency.
no.
That if you do this, everyone gets screwed because we all do business with each other.
So let me ask you this, because there has been a lot of talk recently from some guys in the know that say we're moving into a new phase, that everything we've encountered up to this point has been based off of an old system that was built, so to speak. When I say system, foreign policy, that was built off of World War II, right?
Hmm.
After World War II was done. And now it seems like we're moving out of that, right? And that is the one place that I do raise an eyebrow a little bit is like we're moving into a different phase, right? We're no longer working off the same set of principles or the same model that we have been since the end of World War II.
No, we haven't, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Are you referring to like for like is it us or like the world in general that you're
The
referring to?
world in general,
So yeah,
right?
there's like
It
there's
is
like
precipitated by us, right? Let me say that,
so there's
right?
like the multipolar world theory,
Mm-hmm.
that's popularized by a Russian philosopher named Alexander Dugin. But like BRICS as an economic organization, as
Right.
is it ours NAFTA? Is that what it is?
Yes. Yep.
And so yeah, BRICS was formulated to oppose NAFTA, for an example, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Ironically, so with what's going on in Iran, for
Mm-hmm.
example, that's kind of like, are we trying to bankrupt or like destabilize the BRICS nations?
Right.
You know, because that's Brazil, Russia, Iran, China, and Russia,
Okay.
right? And so they all want to do business with each other. We're taking actions. Venezuela was either joining them or was already a part of that,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't recall off the top of my
I think they were joining. They were.
and but Iran's part of it, and so people want, are we trying to like suffocate China through all this? There's even backroom talk on Twitter, like why Russia's allowing this to happen because they have good ties with Iran, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is because Trump will ease their sanctions and step off of Ukraine if Trump is allowed to do this. And so it's, do we disrupt BRICS? Is this part of this thing, to maintain the old order of NAFTA supremacy, trade supremacy in the world? and I would push back, and I'm not an economist, so I don't know. Like,
Right.
isn't the idea of free trade that competition is good?
You should be.
And
Yeah.
so why wouldn't we let BRICS do what BRICS does?
Right. Unless, right? And this, look, we talked before we recorded. This thing's going to go in some places. The interesting thing here is if there's a recognition by us that the old model is dying,
Hmm.
right? That foreign policy that we have come to espouse and operate under, if that's going away, all bets are kind of off.
It's in a way, it's true. So I think we need to walk that back too for some listeners who I don't know who. So the order that we're talking about, right?
Hmm.
The immediate post World War II order was two poles of
Hmm.
power. You know, the Soviet bloc and Soviet Union, and then Europe and the United States on the other
Right.
side, right? Capitalism and communism.
Yep.
And those are two civilizations at war with each other. And you could just you know, lump China in with
Sure.
Russia at that
They
point,
were a
right?
large non-player for the most part for
At the
most of
time,
that time.
right,
Yeah.
right, right. And then the Soviet Union fell.
Hmm.
And then the world becomes unipolar. And what we've seen in my lifetime is a complete American hegemony. Is that how you'd say that?
Hegemony. Yep.
Where we run everything. And Francis Fukuyama wrote that book, The End of History,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Which I actually take some fundamental disagreements with.
I do too.
And his whole premise was we were at war civilizationally between these two powers, and now that we have triumphed and destroyed all other ideologies, and that our liberal capitalist ideology is the only one that's uncontested, everyone's going to be enlightened. Everyone's going to get along because of free trade. Everyone's going to, uh, you know, the mark of an enlightened civilization is going to come with, just they're going to absorb democracy and free trade and capitalism and money and banks and all that. And I've read some quote somewhere. It's interesting that, democracy isn't the counting of votes; it's the counting of money.
Yeah. You
Uh,
know, it
you know,
yeah, no, it's true, right?
but that's the world we live in. But it's changing.
It's changing and it's changing. The rate at which it's changing is breathtaking, right? If you study history at all and you just start lining up events, I mean, the speed at which this is happening is absolutely breathtaking. There's a great meme that said, you know, uh, showed Iran going to war with America, and it said Gen Xers experiencing their sixth once in a lifetime event,
No
right?
kidding.
And I had
Boy,
I had to sit back and think about it. They're not wrong, right?
it's like that song "We Didn't Start the Fire" by Billy Joel.
Yes, yes,
Yeah, like all these things that just happened in the 20th century or till now too, right?
right. Let's go down the list, right? I mean, I'm just going to go back from my earliest thought, my earliest memories, right? Probably the first one is like the Challenger explosion.
Sure.
Not a big deal, right? I mean, it's a big deal, but it's not huge, right? Then after the Clinton years, things start to accelerate. Um, we start to see 9/11 happen, the war in
Yeah.
Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. Then we move into an economic damn near collapse at home in 2008.
Hmm.
Then we move on into the Obama years where we just have a horrible economy for a lot of years.
Hmm.
We move into the Trump thing. Now we're into COVID,
Right.
right? Now we're into Joe Biden's administration, and we have absolute chaos on our border.
Hmm.
Just a horrible withdrawal out of Afghanistan. We just keep going crappy. Trump gets in office, and then in the meantime, you had October 7th or 3rd, I can't remember what date it was in Israel, right? That attack. You have that war going on, Russia and Ukraine. Now we're going to war with Iran. These things are all beginning to stack, right? And that's the part to me that really signals. If we go back to the 50s on to about again the Clinton years, everything is very stable. Even through the Cold War, because MAD did its job, right?
Hmm.
Mutually assured destruction did its job. there's still a sense of stability there, and I feel like that sense of stability now is eroding at a rapid pace.
Good point.
And that means things like what we're talking about tonight
Well, so it's
can't be taken off the table any
it's
longer.
destabilizing because America hedged its bets on Fukuyama's theory that
Yes,
free trade and economics and money can rule the world,
right,
and everyone's had enough of it. You know, other civilizations, so like Dugin, Alexander Dugin, a Russian philosopher, he's really interesting. You and I have talked about him,
mm-hmm,
and I haven't read enough of his stuff to say I agree with him, but it's thought provoking in the sense that he says essentially different civilizations that come from different places have different values, and to impose our values on another civilization is bad news, or it doesn't work. So, like, a liberal democracy isn't going to work in the Middle East.
no,
That kind of government isn't going to work. In
no,
fact, I would almost argue it only worked in America under conditions that no longer exist
right,
anymore.
100%,
Because the thing with democracy is it metaphysically orders society from below. It takes the lowest common denominator and tries to make sense of things with
right,
that. Winston Churchill once said, um, democracy is the worst form of government. And you can tell as much by having a 5-minute conversation with the average voter.
right,
You know, and so it doesn't people look at certain things as like this is my right. And like so to wield political power seems to be one of those things.
yeah,
And it didn't used to be. Like America wasn't that way when it was founded at
no,
all. It
no,
was a certain people, white men who owned land, could vote.
yep,
And even in older societies, it's interesting too. Not only was it that essentially, but you were initiated.
yes,
Young men were usually cast out of society, they had to go through an ordeal, a
a rite of
trial, a
passage,
rite of passage, where they proved themselves worthy of being men. But not only that, it was it was basically a myth type thing that was
right,
experienced by everyone. What it did is it shaped the collective consciousness of the tribe with a shared context.
right,
And we in America no longer have that shared context.
no, we do not,
And so we are divided.
yes,
Because I'm not saying everyone needs to be a robot, but if you had people, different personalities, and people have the philosophy of individualism and the aspect of having a personality are not necessarily the same thing. So when you take personalities, that you can have different personalities and free agency and still come from a bonding experience that shapes your culture, and
absolutely,
it can be formative across the board. And it doesn't mean you have to vote the same way, but it means you have the same values that are rooted in your very soul. And we
right,
do not have that anymore.
no, we do not. We haven't had that in I'll tell you where I think it goes off the rails as far as that goes. I think
Sure.
it's the 60s,
Oh,
right?
100%.
I think
100%.
that's where it goes off the rail. It was the first time we questioned things like, well, is this plan that the founders gave us that good, right?
Hmm.
You start seeing
Yeah, it's the communist sympathizers in
communist
America. Yeah.
sympathizers, and you start seeing a decay coming from within. Um, and you're right, that rite of passage thing is huge. And there's so much with Dugan I do disagree with, right?
Hmm.
Full disclosure, I did a term paper on Dugan last
Hmm.
time I went to college.
I'll read it, by the way.
Yeah, I'll find it. I'll dig it up. I don't know if I still have it. Hopefully I do somewhere, but I'll dig it up. And he's a little spooky in my opinion. However, just like I'll say, I vehemently disagree with Marx on what the solutions are. But to be fair, some of his critiques are fair, right?
So I haven't read Marx, so maybe one day. I doubt it, but just because of time, not because like I don't feel like it's worth doing,
Right,
because I'm not the kind of guy that's not going to read stuff that someone I disagree with has to say. I'm not
right,
that kind of guy, but like time.
right,
You know what I mean?
right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I get it, right? And look, some of his critiques are fair, right? They are Now, I disagree with the solution, right? I think that rather than a massive ordering of society in such a way that it's cradle to grave and
So
whatnot,
my distant. No, you go first.
I disagree with his outcomes, but nonetheless, his critiques were fair.
Okay. Can I comment on Marx?
Yeah.
So my distant view, from what I do know of Marx, is a big thing that's flawed with him is he wants to reduce everything to a materialistic
Yes.
worldview. You know, incredibly like hyper materialistic,
Absolutely.
where even to the point of basically human salvation is dependent on completely on economic
Yes.
material production.
Yes.
And
Yep.
the idea with Marxism is the theory that like so you had like the archaic world
Right.
and you had elites
Yep.
and peasants and whatever you're so in the archaic world you had essentially four different classes of people, the caste system.
Right.
Right? You had the warrior elite,
Yep.
which were the nobles. You had the priests, and then you had the merchants, and you had the peasants, for
Right.
lack of better words. So your laborers and your serfs and your
Yep.
whatever. That's hierarchy. And that's what all classical civilizations were.
Right.
Just going to throw that out there without advocating for it or not advocating for it. I'm just going to throw that out there for now. Then you have so Marx says this is like the initial thing, and then it moves to, um, at first there's a tension between church and state
Yep.
in the Holy Roman Empire,
Yep.
right? And so there's kind of the priestly caste and the warrior caste, the kings,
Yes.
fight with the Pope.
Yep.
And then the Germanic kingdoms overthrow the Pope and they become Protestant,
Right.
and the Holy Roman Empire dissolves. And so you have nationalism that supersedes the archaic world. Then the merchant class, which was considered
Right.
below that, then kind of gets rid of the nobility and the
Yep.
kings, and that happens around World War One.
Yep. Yep. You have the
And so
Bolshevik
Marx
Revolution.
is talking
Yeah.
about all that, and he was before this happened, though, right?
Yep.
And so he talks about all the liberal democracy had already existed and like capitalism already existed in America, right? At this point.
Right.
So he saw that. And he says capitalism was a necessary step in evolution
Yes.
towards not so he's not like against it in the sense of like this was evil to begin like to start with, but like no, this is necessary for where we want to go, but
Yes.
we don't want to stop there. And then it's the lowest common denominator. I'm putting my own spin on
Yes.
this. Then revolts against the merchant class.
Yes.
And so
Yep.
Marxism, from my distant view, it's a complete metaphysical inversion of an archaic system where
Yeah.
one caste revolts against the one higher in each generation.
Well, and that's interesting to point out because that's why conflict is so necessary in Marxism, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there ever ceases to be a conflict between an oppressed and oppressor class, communism will die.
It's the perpetual revolution.
It's a perpetual revolution, right?
Right, and that was Mao
That
with
was
the Cultural
absolutely,
Revolution in the 60s, where
absolutely.
dude, that guy's so freaking evil.
Dude, Marx, like, look, okay, now I'm gonna go down a deep rabbit hole. Damn it, here we are.
That's what we're here
Okay,
for.
so I read a book just a couple years ago called The Devil and Karl Marx. Okay,
Interesting.
now this was wrote by a Yale trained professor. The dude's not dumb.
Right, I got you.
And he says as he starts out the book, he's kind of in the camp of atheism. And by the time he's done writing the book, he's found God.
Cool.
Now here's why. Because he's thoroughly convinced Marx was possessed by evil. And
no dispute.
And oh no dispute, right? And there's like he actually did you know Marx wrote plays?
No.
He wrote 4 plays, if I'm not mistaken, and all of them had to do with selling your soul to the devil.
All of them?
All of them. His favorite play was Faust. Right?
Faust is hilarious. Well, there's different versions of
Yes.
I haven't read Goethe's version. I think that's
Okay.
the one that I want to read. But Hugh Nibley talks about it all the time
Right. Yeah.
in his sermons, and it is the funniest thing,
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
the
No,
way.
there's one play that's funny, and then there's one that's a little darker, right? More like a how-to manual. And I do have some questions around that.
Okay.
But nonetheless, like he made his kids call him um the old devil, right? Um
Weird.
he talks about striding through the chaos of this world that he caused to bring forth a new one. I mean, some really dark stuff.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, like in me saying that Marx had some fair critiques, I don't want anyone thinking I'm a fan because that dude was flat ass evil, as was Mao, as was Stalin.
Dude, my dad made me read. Did he make me read it? I ended up reading a book. I was probably like freshman year high school
Okay,
on the Cultural Revolution, and I he might have even known the guy that wrote it because my dad had a professor at West Point
okay,
that came from China,
gotcha.
and he escaped the Cultural Revolution as a kid
All right,
and came
yeah,
over. And so that was like Mao, who was the chairman of the Communist Party, basically president of China around the 1960s. Like China's been communist for 15 years or so, give or take
right,
15, 20 years. This revolution's been over. We beat the nationalists.
yep,
We beat the imperialists. We beat the capitalists.
yeah,
Everyone, right? And the new generation that's been living under this for 15 to 20 years is now the majority of which are in high school era, right? Or
right,
university. And he starts telling them to like revolt against your parents, revolt against your
yes,
teachers. They aren't communist enough. You need to now, they remember the time before communism. You need to purge them.
yep.
And they killed everyone.
100%, dude. He like some of his ideas were, we'll stop giving people names and we'll just give them numbers,
Yeah.
right? He's the guy that coined the phrase to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. Only he was talking about people and breaking them. Like just every one of them that ever deal in communism, it's like, yeah, okay, start the clock. He's got exactly 36 seconds before he's evil. Um,
Gotcha.
it's just kind of the way it goes, right? Because it devalues human life.
So yeah, it's anti-spiritual. It's the most materialistic thing. It swaps out a material salvation for spiritual salvation because it asserts that human suffering will end with economic equality
Right,
and how they define economic equality, right?
right.
And so that's the everything is a human struggle to the point of basically where society gets rid of state and class. It's
Yep.
Marxism and the golden, objective is to abolish state and abolish class. And so a socialist is generally, I think there's other definitions for this, but like in the Marxist sense, a socialist is not a communist because communism is the state where that happens, where
Hmm.
there's no nations, there's no states anymore. There's no government. Everyone just lives in this economic, free, almost anarchistic, but it's not quite anarchistic thing. And there's no classes, which I don't understand how that works at all, by the way. But
It doesn't.
exactly. So socialism is the state that approaches a stateless and classless society.
Right.
So the USSR was the United Soviet Socialist Republic. So it's
Yes.
Soviet socialism trying to approach this basically what I would say is unattainable goal of communism. But they even knew it too in a certain way. There's
Sure.
an old Soviet joke where you know what the KGB is,
Hmm.
and probably some of our listeners know what the KGB is. But for those who don't know what the KGB is, they're basically the secret police and
Hmm.
counterintelligence of the Soviet Union. And they were nefarious for pretty much being it's the secret police that locked up everyone who disagreed with the government.
They were the goon squad.
They were the goon squad. So the joke in Soviet Russia was you have one proletariat asking another proletarian, "Do you think there will be KGB in communism?" No. People will learn to arrest themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
No.
how would there be a mechanism for KGB to arrest anyone in a stateless
Hundred
society,
percent.
right?
And if you read Marx, he
Yeah.
talks about breeding a race of supermen, right? And but the major quality here of these supermen is that they'll only take what they need, right? So if it's food you're producing, they're just going to take the food that they need.
So have you ever watched Star Trek?
Yes.
Dude, there is some serious. I've been actually rewatching some of that recently.
There's some socialist push
There's
there.
some hardcore Marxism in the next
Yes, there
generation.
is.
And
Yes,
we've
there is.
evolved beyond materialist incentives to we
Yes.
don't have we don't have money. Money doesn't
Right.
exist anymore.
Right.
We all do this for the benefit of humanity.
Yes, they
Yeah.
have fully embraced the creed from each his need to each his or from each his desire to each his need, right? Yeah, no, there's some serious lefty stuff in Star Trek.
Hardcore.
Dude,
Hardcore.
what
I was talking to my dad about this and he's like, I never I mean, yeah, it's there. And we never cared so much because in the generation I grew up in, we weren't, as you would say, triggered by these things because we didn't have to agree with what the media that we consumed. Like we just said, that's a stupid idea, whatever,
well
and
the other
watched it for good entertainment. But I'm going back and watching this, and because are so hyper left now,
yeah,
and I'm like, holy crap, this was all subliminal programming, like
a
great to me.
hundred, 100%. So I watched an episode probably 5 years ago. Night I was sick, I couldn't sleep. So you
Uh-huh.
know how like you can't sleep, you don't want to keep your spouse up.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go hang out on the couch, right? I'm gonna take some NyQuil. I'm gonna chill on the couch. And so I'm flipping through the channels, and I'll be damned if it's not Star Trek: The Next Generation, right? And I'm like, sweet, I'll watch. Dude, I was about halfway through one episode, and I'm like,
I'm gonna throw a book at something.
you commie SOBs, right? I'm like, I didn't realize you were feeding me this dribble. But once you know,
Yeah,
right, like it ruins a lot of things, unfortunately.
it does. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's we've been programmed, dude, the entire time.
Totally. All right. So back to nuclear exchange. So so now in the absence of this order that we have come to rely on, right? This socio-political climate that we have enjoyed, which has been relatively a good era of stability up until after the Clinton administration. And again, I'm not blaming Clinton for that. Look, I think Clinton had his issues for sure, but this has been in the making for quite some time. And some of the critiques that Dugan gives are legit, right?
I think so. From what I've heard, they are. And I
Uh,
don't. See,
you can't.
I don't like him because one of the reasons I don't like about him is he is the kind of guy that seems to want to import third world values in a lot of places, even especially in
Yes.
Russia. He's really bad in the sense that I'm like the most anti-immigration person here possible. In the sense that it needs to be fixed right now. But they're over in Russia, I mean, they're inviting everyone to come over. And you wonder, like, is it the war thing that they're going on and they need bodies to fill the industrial machine, maybe? But yeah, it's like anyone from India, Afghanistan, Syria, like Iran, like anyone even America, they want America. They talk about they want American Christians to come over. You know,
I can tell you why that is. So did you know about a decade ago, Putin actually tried pushing a bill to legalize polygamy in Russia?
I did not know that.
He tried to legalize polygamy because the birth rates were falling.
Interesting.
Now, this is my own theory, just my own. I think a lot of what we're seeing out of these Eastern European and Western countries is a direct result of population collapse.
Dude,
I
I
think,
just read a book on population collapse.
and I think that's what China's up against.
They are up against it.
And
Everyone's up against it.
everybody's up against it. We all not we all. I mean, look, I'm doing my part. I got 7. Um, but the thing is, and somewhere there's a really good fundamentalist who's like rookie.
Those are rookie numbers.
Right.
You gotta pump up those numbers.
I know where that comes from. Anyway, anyway, um, I'm not telling on the podcast what that is. You'll have to call me. Um, anyway, um, yeah, like once you have population collapse, and here's the thing, we've already passed the point of no return.
Interesting.
Nobody's talking about this, right? If everybody started having kids tomorrow in the United States, it's possible that we could maintain where we're at and maybe even get above that the next generation.
Sure.
but we are not meeting replacement rate right now.
No. I think South Dakota was the only state in the union the last year that was.
Right. Yep. That is it. And once you miss out on that, once you miss a generation where you have not hit replacement rate, you're going to tank. And that means that all the systems that we have come to rely on in our societies, if you don't have the staff to man those, done. Now, I'm going to do one better. Where's population collapse come from? I think it's two sources. The first one was the climate agenda, right? Too many
100%.
pen.
What was that Mormon film that came? There's been like two versions of it. Saturday's Warrior,
Yes.
where they
Yep.
talk about basically it's us critiquing the hippies, critiquing the world, and like Population Zero is that one song. It's
Right.
like
Yep.
we don't have enough
Yep.
to feed everyone. We're gonna starve because there's gonna be too many mouths to feed.
Yep. Now, second,
Bull crap, by the way.
second, this one I might have to come hide out at your place. Feminism. Feminism's the other one. When mom left home,
100%.
when mom left home, we weren't having as many babies. And now we're starting to see the absolute fruit of both of those ideologies coming home.
Well, and it's the media has pushed liberalism and Marxism to the point where all those values have been subverted on TV for generations. The father is Homer Simpson.
Yes.
The buffoon, the
Yep.
idiot that maybe he's lovable, but he's not respect worthy.
No. No.
And the mom's intelligent,
Yep.
and she
Yep.
runs the house, and
Yep.
it's destroyed the family. The very idea of a nuclear family has destroyed civilization.
100%.
I'm a victim of that. I've been out of the house since I was 18, and I haven't gone back. And I'm practically screwed,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. And I'm treading water financially,
Sure.
but why should I have left home? Why should I have not helped my father build something different and do generational wealth? Beat the system
100%.
because I was promised the American dream,
Yep.
but
There are so many things here. Let me take a quick break, and then I want to get into this generational living thing. So that whole multi-generational thing,
yeah,
that's only been recently. I talked to you about this once, standing outside of the house here. You and I were both raised with this paradigm.
hmm
You turn 18 and mom and dad break your plate and you got to leave home.
yep,
That's a fairly recent invention.
100%.
And I'm going to go back to an experience that I had here not too long ago. And there was a gentleman who was a baby boomer who said, "Well, why is your son not out of the house yet?" And Michael, I'm ashamed to admit, because he's 22, that I felt a little bit uneasy in that moment. I wasn't my normal boisterous, you can go pound sand self, right? Um, but it got me thinking, and I started looking. I started doing the research, and I'm like, no, this whole you turn 18, you leave home thing, that was not a thing until about the 50s.
hmm
Most people up until that point were living out in the country. They were agrarian.
hmm
And if you had a son, he'd stay with you until he got married. And then after he got married, chances are he was building on the land that's been in your family for a long
Yeah,
time.
in the archaic world, dude, you moved 400 yards down the field in your own tent, and that was the difference.
Absolutely.
That was the difference, and your family was right there.
And it's not even archaic, right? I mean, we're talking the 1940s, the 1930s,
hmm
right? Less than 100 years ago. That was the norm.
hmm
Now we're here. Now, this is where I'm going to really irritate some folks, but I believe it in my heart of hearts. We pay our guys good wages. Good wages. I pride myself on taking care of our guys. I had a guy come to me, said, I need a raise. I'm like, well, we just handed out raises. What's going on? And he's like, well, I just can't make it. And I'm like, You mean you can't make it, right? And he's like, well, yeah, I can't make it. And I'm like, well, do you want, I have an accountant. I can send you to my accountant. He can help you. He's like, actually, I kind of trust you. Would you be willing to go over my bills with me? Like, absolutely. I'll help you. It kind of felt good, right? I love my guys, right?
Yes, you do.
Genuinely,
Yes, you do.
I love them. You've heard you've heard
I've been one of your guys. I've
yeah,
worked for you,
yeah,
absolutely.
I love my guys, right? And I
Yeah.
don't say that like love like in got like I love them like brothers, right?
Hmm.
And it felt good that that he recognized that and was like, if you could help me, that'd be great. And we sat down, we did his budget. I expected to find, well, he's probably got dumb credit card debt. He's probably got dumb loans out there. He didn't have any of those things. He was living as frugally as he could. He worked and his wife worked. His wife worked not out of desire, but out of necessity now.
Hmm.
And he was right. He was right. And so we gave everybody another raise. But we are some of the higher paying people around. Our company is. And that got me looking, and this is circling back to this generational living thing. So bear with me.
No, no doubt, no doubt. Take your time.
I started to look at what happened, right? Why are we here? Now, I hear this a lot. Oh, this generation,
Work ethic is terrible.
they're soft, their work ethic is bad. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Now,
So
now I'm going to say something. A lot of the problems that not so much Gen X, right? Some we were a weird generation that like made it out okay, right? Probably because we were a little feral and we were at the very end of getting things together. Anything past early millennials are screwed. And why are they screwed? They are screwed because many of them did not have the courage of their convictions when it came to matters of liberty and free markets that they spouted at the lip about, right? So the same people say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, is living off the government teat in the form of either government pensions or Social Security.
yeah, and Trump just had that whole thing where he's been talking his whole presidential term about lowering the cost of housing, and then he just basically got up and said, "Can't do that because it's going to devalue the houses of,"
Yes. Yeah.
and alienated everyone under 30 years old, if not older than that, as
Yeah.
his voting base by doing so.
Yeah. No, 100%. If you want to talk about a selfish generation, it's the generation that knowingly, purposely enslaved their kids and their grandkids with a financial debt that can't be paid. Those aren't my words. Those are Thomas Jefferson's words. You go read his words. You guys were the ones that screwed this all up. Your parents went to war, came home, you reaped the benefits of a brand new economy, and then got dissatisfied with it, became hippies, then in the 80s became yuppies, and then proceeded to screw everything up for your kids and your grandkids that going forward. Now, how's this tie back in to this thing with generational living? It ties back in because they upset the natural order.
They did.
They upset the natural order, right? Because they maybe not them so much, but certainly their parents had the benefit of having that generational living where
Yeah.
where those children of the parents had exposure to the grandparents, right?
Yeah.
Mom and dad didn't get put into a home. It was up to the kids to take care of mom and dad. Not maybe financially, but in terms of, hey, mom and dad are up the driveway. Let's go check on them and make sure they're okay. Likewise, mom and dad would be like, you know what? Or grandma and grandpa were like, you know what? Mom and dad need a date night. Let's take the grandkids for a night and we'll have a
Yes.
sleepover. It was a much healthier society, but it was all upended.
Sacrificed eternal structure and form for mass production and quantity over quality.
Right. And here's what else I'm going to say. That was prevalent in the archaic societies. It wasn't so prevalent during late monarchy like we saw in England by the time we're breaking off because they had already they didn't necessarily industrialize, but they definitely had bigger cities,
Mhm.
right? America was a throwback to the archaic
Yeah.
in that we had resources that we could still run with. But there is a large segment that are all about, I'm going to get mine, even if it costs my kids and grandkids. You upset the natural order. You enslaved your children and your grandchildren into financial debt to pay for your crap.
Yep. 100%. The wages are completely unequal,
Yes.
too. The standard of living. Yeah, you could argue that we have better toys, but those are materialistic things that I don't really care about.
Well, do we though? I mean, because now I'm looking at our toys and I'm seeing that there is much a problem, right?
Well, that's a good point. They are a problem in a way. They're a huge distraction away from the world we truly live
Yeah,
in a way, right? And so we're less grounded in reality
100%.
than we used to be. And then there's like even the stuff like the point, like yeah, like the technological marvels are here, but everything breaks. Everything's designed to break.
Well,
These things are designed to outdate in like a year or two, and then you get a new one.
is it an Apple or an,
It's a Sam. It doesn't matter. It's a Samsung, but it doesn't matter. They're designed to on the software to be corrupted,
yes,
so you have to buy a new one.
yep. I and it's just not that. It's all the toys I'm talking about. It's all the social media we're now importing, right? We letting our kids run rampant with. And look, I did it. I want to say that up front, right? I certainly did it, right? I didn't have any idea what I was looking at. And so when my kids turned about 14, 15 years old, I'm like, yeah, get them a phone. I want them to have a phone. If there's a school shooting, I want them to be able to call me, right?
Sure.
And it came from the best of intentions, but what's the road to hell paved with?
Yeah.
I mean, it's, but nonetheless, we've just done things that are completely unnatural, and it really starts with the baby boomers. And I remember thinking about this during the last recession that we had in '08, when I really started to question everything. And I was like, well, when it comes to Social Security, there, and I'm willing to do it still. There's going to have to be a generation that's willing to take it into in the shorts so that your kids and your grandkids aren't taxed to death. Because, as I said before, there's a generation before me who is extremely selfish, who is not going to live without it. Fine, I'll keep paying your bill. I'll pay your tab, but leave my kids alone and leave my grandkids alone.
There's got to be a way to refinance somehow. I'm not an economist though, like I
I'm not
said.
either. I'm not either. And so this destruction of generational living, in my opinion, has single-handedly destroyed an entire two generations worth of people.
So yeah, it is. It is. The culture we have isn't really worth preserving, and so there's nothing worth fighting for going
No,
forward. The birth rate is abysmal because of all of this too, so there's nothing to replace us. There's no legacy. And then even more scary than that is there's the testosterone decline.
phthalates, yeah.
That's a part of the fertility crisis, um, where the projection when you take a graph, a linear graph, and you track the testosterone of a male at even up to 60 years old in 1960 to now, and it's like a quarter
Yeah.
of what it was, and you project that to 2050 or so, uh, men aren't going to be able to have kids at that
No,
point
no. Have you
without medical help,
right,
without whatever you call it.
testosterone shots or
Yeah,
yeah,
all that stuff.
yeah,
Without that, it's we've been talking about nuclear Armageddon, but that's spermageddon. It's
right,
a real. I just read a book on this by a guy named Dr. Cornish Dale. He's a philosopher. He's not a philosopher. He's a professor of anthropology in Britain, and he wrote a book called The Last Men, where he severely critiques Francis Fukuyama's The End of History.
right,
Which, by the way, since we're talking about that again, it's not the end of chronological history. It's the idea of it's the end of civilizational competition in history.
right, yep,
Anyways, so, um, but he talks about how that ties in with the death of masculinity.
yep,
You know, was a huge thing, and how the society of super production and mass production that we have is tied directly to the fertility crisis
dude.
to the point like all the plastics we ingest are killing the sperm
Phthalates.
count. Yeah.
Dude, I found out about phthalates and I stopped microwaving anything. in
Yeah,
plastic,
me
right?
too. 100. That's what I did last month too, or 2 months ago, whatever it was.
Once I read about it, I'm like, nope. If I have to reheat something, it's either going to be on the
So,
stove or on a
so
glass plate.
to put it in perspective, 2050, in 2050, my son will be 27.
Yeah,
The peak time to be having kids, and that linear graph projects that the vast majority of men would be able to unhappy. That's one generation from now,
yeah, yep.
unable to have more children without medical help.
And look, I can't. I Yeah, I think it's by design, right? I was trying not to put on the tinfoil hat, but here we go.
We're putting on the tinfoil hat.
I think it's absolutely by design, right? Because a man with less testosterone is a man who's more governable.
Yep. Plato talked about this, by the way.
Doesn't surprise
In
me.
the Republic, people, his students are asking him, and I don't think he's necessarily advocating for this, but they're asking him about ways of like an ideal civilization can be established essentially. And he talked about, well, there's always going to be war, and the only way you could get rid of war would be to feed everyone a plant-based diet.
Check, check, check.
Get rid of
Which
meat. Stop feeding everyone meat
I'll
and eggs.
probably definitely edit out this point, but
No.
yeah, I uh I had a good friend. Shouldn't say good friend. He was more of an acquaintance slash light friend, so to speak. Went vegan. And I remember he gave it up once. By the way, it's a funny thing. Have you ever seen the videos of what happens when a vegan gets drunk or a vegetarian?
No.
They eat meat. They eat meat. I kid you
Oh,
not.
sure. Yeah.
When those inhibitions are gone, they're like, give me bacon. Um, but like he went vegan for a year, and after that, he started eating meat again. And I said, well, what's going on? He said, I find I'm more amorous when I eat meat. I was like, oh, so you popped a heart on finally, huh? Right? Which is what it did. It dropped his testosterone to such a low number that he could not
So,
get up ahead of steam.
so in the 1960s, because there was an egg shortage, or like because of bird flu or something like
Yep.
that, the the government told the FDA to issue a statement that if you consume more than 3 egg yolks a week, you have a risk of developing cardiovascular heart disease.
Yes.
So totally fake,
Yep.
by the way. And that cholesterol is bad. Like all cholesterol is bad. And so we have like this food pyramid thing, right? That comes from that time period. And then RFK recently was like, invert that. And then you have a real food
No,
pyramid.
what he said was it needs to go from the top to the bottom. Which, look, I like RFK, right?
I did
Well, like that's when I knew we were close to the end times. Is when I was like,
Kennedy's cool.
I might vote for Kennedy, right? Like
Yeah.
that was crazy town. But no, I mean Plato's right. I mean, you go to a plant-based diet. Look, I think a woman can get away with it. I've seen plenty of women get healthy on it. I shouldn't say plenty. A few women get healthy on it. I wouldn't. I think the Book of Mormon prescribes a meat diet for women, right? First Nephi,
Dude, first Nephi,
right?
those women were jacked, and so were the men.
Yep.
And the women stopped complaining when they were eating meat.
Yep.
And they got strong.
Yep. I'm just saying, right? And what were they strong for? Nursing their children,
Yeah.
right? And so this idea that we need to be eating the just stack it up. You're enslaved financially. You are enslaved by the food that you eat. You are enslaved by the plastics that we are forced to consume, right? Look, no matter how hard I try, plastic water bottles, right? There's, go down the list. Everything's got plastic.
So in the book I was reading, The Last Men, uh, he advocates for a few things to kind of fix that. One of them is never microwave anything in plastic.
Right? Yep.
Filter your water. A simple water filter will get rid of that. Don't drink anything out of plastic. Get rid of your plastic toys for children.
Yep.
Don't let them chew on anything plastic. Forget all that. Vacuum your floors pretty regularly, also because your kids are going to be crawling around your floors and there's going to be plastic particulates from your stuff all over the place. And sauna.
Yeah, sauna is a big one.
To sweat out all the bad stuff, all
the
toxins.
Yep. That's exactly right. And so you see all this stuff start stacking up, right? Now look, I do believe that the old adage, never blame what could be stupidity on ill intent. However, when you get to this point and we've stacked up this much, I have a hard time saying it's not intentional.
I would almost rather nuclear war than where this is going,
Yeah,
by the way, because at least it would reset all this.
exactly.
We have a different kind of toxicity that's worse in a way.
We have built, and you remember a few years back, I shouldn't, yeah, it's about 2 years. It's right when I moved to Missouri, and I moved to Missouri in February of 24. Um, I told you it was when we were in Springfield, and I told you that day is when you were getting ready to start the Old Testament series.
Yeah,
And I said I was being oddly drawn to the Tower of Babel
yeah.
over and over and over.
Yes, I remember
And
that.
I think I figured out why.
Okay.
And this goes to your thing of almost preferring a collapse of some sort. I don't think that's wrong. I think what we have done is we have built a modern day Tower of Babel out of our ideologies, out of our technologies, out of our financial system.
Hmm. I agree.
And the best thing that can happen is the Lord in his mercy scrambles it and causes us to reset and go back to things that are real. When I look at COVID, there was even a blessing to COVID, right? First, it wasn't that bad. Second, it forced us back to things that were real.
Yeah.
Now, the scary part is that most of society rebelled against that. Most of society goes, I just want to get back to normal. I want to put my kids back in school. I want to go back to work, right? If it was mom, if it was dad, I need to get out of this house away from my wife and kids. It exposed so many flaws. And we didn't take advantage to be like, oh crap, I need to fix my family,
Right.
right?
Sure.
Instead, we just said, let's get back to normal, which is the farthest thing from normal.
Gotcha.
And I honestly think that's where we're at. We are living the Tower of Babel all over again. May not be a physical structure like we thought of, but we've done it with our tech,
Oh no,
we've done
no,
it with
yeah.
our money, and we've done it with our ideologies and even our diet.
100%. It's the monoculture of our of globalism. I'll put it that
Yes,
way.
yeah,
Is the monolith that we
yes,
have.
yes, no. Look, I tend to be a guy who likes people by and large, right?
Sure.
I want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt.
You're very gregarious.
Having said that, not all societies are created equal.
No, they're not.
And some societies have detrimental practices and ideas, right? That I don't care to import. And um, that needs to be recognized for what it is and understand back to the end of history thing, right? And back to Dugan. We can't expect to walk into Iraq, Iran, any of those other countries and be like, okay, where's Thomas Jefferson? We're here to liberate you.
Right. No,
Okay.
no, absolutely not.
America got to the point it did because of a bunch of other factors, right?
Yeah, different factors, different racial factors, different historical factors,
Right.
yeah, and everything. And even our history is being written now, by the way.
Absolutely, it is.
All the
Yep.
movies are period pieces right now,
Yep.
and they depict things the way that they weren't. And the way that they are now, like or could be now. Like I think I saw something on the BBC, for example. This is an over the top example, but it shows you what it is. Because then, like 2 generations down the road, anyone watching a period piece would be like, "Oh, this is the way it's always been. This is set in history, and this resembles what I'm seeing now." When you see a Black King of England set in the Middle Ages,
It doesn't work.
it doesn't work.
Right.
That's bullcrap.
Right.
And it's painting this picture that like this has been the globo homo world forever,
No.
and
No.
that's what they're trying to paint though.
I know.
But yeah, 100%.
But you can see this also in the way we portrayed the Native American, right? Where it was the noble savage, right?
Hmm.
Oh, well, they didn't go to war with each other. They lived in harmony with the land and with each other. Horse crap. They were killing people and taking each other prisoner and slavery Look, you know why the Texas Rangers are a thing?
I'm assuming because of the Indians
The
now.
Comanche.
Oh, that makes sense to me.
The Comanche. Okay, they were brutal and they were horrific. They were terrorists. I don't know how else to put it. I'll give you one example. Great book, S.E. Gwynn, Empire of the Summer Moon, all about the Comanche.
Cool.
Down in Texas, there was several women that the Comanche raided a settlement, grabbed them. Okay, you can't reason with that.
No.
There is no let's find common ground. There's no why do you feel bad? Why do you have to do that? No, you find the threat and you extinguish the threat.
There was no, well, maybe we're the real monsters, which is like
Right.
the that's like the background plot for every show ever is
Yes.
we're the real monsters.
Yeah. Dude, you saw it in Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
If you look at some of the newer movies, it is, well, the Jedi were just as bad as the Sith, right? We're in this weird time where we're not happy unless we're crapping on ourselves.
So the modern art form is, and it's what's taught in college, is let's take the classics. Not that Star Wars is a classic in that sense, but it is in a different
You
sense.
shut your mouth.
It is in a different sense, but it's Star Wars or it's Shakespeare. It doesn't matter.
Right.
You take that and you deconstruct it.
Yes.
You turn everything brown, gay, or female.
Yep. Well, and it is also what is I believe has been termed as postmodernism,
It is.
right?
Yeah.
Where there's this idea that we're progressing past those things, and oddly enough, the people who are for postmodernism are also for this idea of redefining language,
Mm.
which is a problem as well.
It's 1984 stuff.
Yes, they redefine language, they redefine the terms, and
Yeah, like the Latinx.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And they redefine the terms, they redefine the words, and now what happens is now you've taken the punishment that God gave to the tower, and you're preempting the ability to come back good because you are taking the very thing God punished us with and now incorporating that, confusing the language. That's why I think we can't really talk anymore either, is because a lot of our language has been so corrupted that that I might tell you something, but it doesn't. The one word I use I think means one thing, means something completely different to you.
Yes. Yeah, I understand completely.
And it's a problem on a massive level because we can't communicate well now. Like there's all of these things that have stacked up, right? And now we're entering this new time of global instability where there will be a new order. We know one thing we know for certain is that power abhors a vacuum. Or vacuum, yeah, yeah. The power abhors a vacuum. Is that the right phrase, or is it?
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I mean, it makes sense to me.
yeah. Somebody's going to fill that role. Something will fill the new order, right? Or the lack of order. What that is anybody's guess at this point. I have a few ideas, and none of them are great, but I do think that's where we're at now.
So it's interesting on something I've deduced. So we talked about Marxism earlier. So there's don't read in the lines. I'm speaking to the audience here, and to you too, I guess. But don't read in the lines too much. And when I say this, but there's three because I'm going to critique two things and not a third thing.
Okay.
Does not mean I necessarily advocate for the
Sure.
third thing.
Sure.
But just for context, there's three things first.
Sure.
There's three classic political theories after the end of the imperial era.
Okay.
The political theories are liberalism, Marxism, and fascism.
Okay. I know what you're talking about when you talk about liberalism, but define it.
Liberalism is the idea. So so for example, the government we have now, the society we have now is liberal.
Yes.
Because generally, as a bigger umbrella.
Yes.
And under that, in the American body politic, you have one wing that is liberal progressive, and then the other is conservative slash Republican or whatever.
Yeah.
It's actually the whole thing is liberal in a classical or general. I don't want to say classical.
Once again,
general sense.
Once again, the confusing of the language, right?
Once again, the confusion of the language. So it's a more representative form of government,
right?
Generally democracy or republicanism, than what we had before, which was monarchy. and capitalism, right? So not a state controlled or centralized economy. So in the general context, liberalism is democracy and capitalism.
Right.
Marxism, which we defined earlier, is a rejection of those things in the sense that we accept them as a historical past, but we want to move to a stateless and classless society.
Yep.
And fascism was largely an undeveloped theory that was purely a reaction to Marxism,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't exist long enough to really see where it would have gone as an ideology because it's extinguished. You know what I mean?
You know, I do know what you mean.
So like I can't really comment on that. Also, I read an article from George Orwell, who wrote 1984 for those who don't know, and who those who haven't read it, and Animal Farm. Those who haven't read those books, you absolutely should. He wrote a really interesting article in 1944 on fascism, and he basically said this thing is so undefinable because it's only used as a billy club to beat someone's head in with.
Yeah.
For whatever, whoever you don't like, you call them a fascist. But essentially, historically, it was a reaction against the Red Scare, in Europe. And there was, no, we didn't. There was Huey Long here, who
Mm-hmm.
Roosevelt said was the most dangerous man in the nation, and then he was assassinated. Um, but and he wouldn't really be what I would call fascist. He was a leftist populist, but it's like the opposite of Donald Trump. Like he was a populist. Like Donald Trump's a populist, but
Mm-hmm.
he's right wing. And Huey Long was a Democrat. But so Marxism wants to abolish class and state. We define class as the caste system,
Right.
the archaic caste system. But liberalism, when it triumphed, and this is my analysis, if I'm going to put on the Dugan hat, or for me, I've never read this from him or anything. This is my analysis. Liberalism is interesting in that it accomplished the same thing in a different way.
Did.
It's like two pincers moving against, uh, like a pincer formation against the truth, from different angles of attack. And what liberalism has evolved into is globalism, which didn't abolish state and class, it abolished gender and race.
Yep. Yep.
That's what it's seeking to do now.
Yep. Here's what's interesting. I think I do have a good definition for fascism for you, and this should scare you.
Okay.
There's a book right behind you called Liberal
Yeah,
Fascism.
I've seen that over there.
Wrote by a guy named Jonah Goldberg, and certainly Goldberg has his own problems. I don't want to say
Was it not Glenn Beck?
no.
Okay. Yeah.
That was Jonah Goldberg.
I thought that was Glenn Beck.
Um, and the line liberal fascism actually comes from a George Carlin stand-up set.
Is that a is that the guy? I'm thinking of a different guy. I think the guy that pretended to be Hitler. Is it that George Carlin, or is
No,
that's the different?
no, that's
Like
somebody
the
else.
dictator, the great dictator, that the black and white film. Different guy.
Different guy. So
That's Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah,
That's what I'm
George
thinking.
Carlin was a stand-up comedian. Was famous for doing a set called the Seven Deadly Words You Can Never Say on TV, right? And they were all swear words, and it was kind of in your face. But he said, if fascism ever comes to America, it's not coming in jack boots and brown shirts. It's coming in Nikes, a tie-dye T-shirt, and a happy face pin.
So hippies.
Hippies. Okay. The definition of fascism, in my opinion, because it is somewhat out there, but there is a certain quality that we can find in all fascistic societies, and it's not a complete takeover of private industry. It's not a nationalization, but it is a controlled economy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's when big business, not mom and pop, big business, come together with government to push mutual um, goals. Okay. I think we're living in an American fascism right now. If we look at what happened during COVID, to go back there again,
Uh-huh.
who was shut down, Michael?
Yeah, I get you there.
Mom and pop shops,
Yep,
right?
yep. And Amazon boomed.
Amazon, Walmart, they all boomed. The big boys boomed.
So that's interesting though, and I just a little pushback to engage with the
Yeah.
conversation. So wouldn't fascism be more the state compelling the companies, but I would read this more as the companies compel the state.
I think it could go either way. I think it could. And I don't think it's about necessarily compelling as much as it is
I mean, compelling through economic
you
pressure like
scratch
money.
my back, I'm going to scratch yours. Krupp Steel is a good example of this.
Okay.
Krupp Steel was the steel manufacturer for Germany. Krupp Steel stayed completely private in their production.
Uh-huh.
But what happened was is that the government came in, said, "Who's our biggest and best manufacturer?" Well, it's Krupp Steel. Okay, we're going to put all of our contracts into Krupp Steel.
Okay.
Okay, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is that the government got to choose winners and losers, right? So there was no free market.
Uh-huh.
At the end of the day, I think based off of that, I think what would have happened is at some point fascism's going to go to socialism. I think it's inevitable, right? As more things get pushed out and you have these big conglomerates, those big conglomerates will become the new ruling class. And everyone's going to work for them, right? You get your choice four places to work at, Amazon, Walmart, or whatever, and they will take care of you cradle to grave. We see it kind of in China, right? If we look
Yeah.
at
It's kind of, have you seen Alien? Where it's
yes,
like the company owns everything.
yes, and this is the part that pisses me off because I have to admit the hippies were right about this. Um, when I was your age, I used to scoff and laugh because you'd have leftists call up like talk shows, radio, news radio, right? And be like, it's the corporations, they're coming, and I'm like, shut up, hippie, right? Like, shut up, hippie.
Well, now they are coming.
But they are, right?
Or like Fight Club, right? You've probably seen
Right.
Fight Club. Like he jokes about, and I've joked with my boss and others, like, nations aren't going to be the ones that colonize space. It's going to be Starbucks, Amazon, Walmart, whatever that colonize other planets, right?
Yes. 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 And so I do think that that is probably a pretty apt description because every fascist country did just that. There was kind of a soft merger between big business and the government. Now, not all fascism is created equal, right? I don't like any of it. I want to say that, right? I'm not saying I'm for
No,
fascism.
it was a very ununified
Right.
dogma, so to speak, because it was made in the vacuum of the onslaught of the Red Scare, right? And so
Yes.
it's like, let what can we find? Like in Spain, you had Italy and you had Germany essentially, and then you had some movements in Romania and maybe in Greece, and they were all a little different, and even in Syria too. But they were all a little different than each other, and so it's hard to give like one definition.
So, yeah, no, well, and the other thing is that social policy is going to vary widely, right?
Uh-huh.
If we look at if we look at Mussolini, that was kind of a maternal form of fascism, right? Mussolini's not killing Jews.
Uh-huh.
He's largely not waging war against his neighbors, right? He does team up with Hitler, but by and large, he's not doing the things that Hitler did. Um, it's kind of we're going to take care of you cradle to grave. Now you move into Germany, and that's more of a paternal kind of fascism, a heavy-handed fascism that will absolutely squash people.
So yeah, like National Socialism was like very rooted in hardline biological race,
Right?
and Italy was not that way.
No.
Italy's Italy's, if I remember correctly, whole thing was their whole mantra was nothing outside of the state and nothing against the state.
Yes. Yep.
And they were trying to be the benevolent dictators for
Yes.
sure. And to what extent, I don't know how popular it was. I mean, obviously it was popular enough to get it started,
Dude, it
right?
was on Time magazine.
Um, but and I don't know what the public, thought of him by the end at all, really. But I
Well,
don't,
they publicly hung him.
I
I
don't
mean,
know. Yeah, I don't know much about Mussolini. But yeah, the methods seem to be fairly different with
Yeah.
and the um I think Mussolini was kind of buddy with the Catholic Church, understandably, probably
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Hitler wasn't so much.
No.
He was a Catholic, but he wasn't so. He, from what I've understood, he wanted to go into like a really hard line scientism was his main thing.
That,
You had Himmler on the other side, but
yeah.
but Hitler was a really he never renounced Catholicism, but he was just like, let's get past Christianity and let's just go into his hard science realism.
Yeah, no, there's some pretty interesting accounts of when Hitler was taking over. At first, he was championed, right? He was like from the church. He was like
Initially, so yeah,
he's here to restore order because we forget that the Weimar Republic, which is the ruling
mhm.
party, they legalized everything. You wanted heroin, you got
So
heroin
it was liberalism
to a
to a fault.
to a fault.
Yeah,
Exactly, right? The burlesque shows, right?
yeah.
All those things come out.
Transgenderism started
Yes.
in 1920s Germany.
Yes, it's all coming out of that time period. And so what you had is you had, and again, this should scare us because again, we're in a similar time, right? And we should really be looking at these lessons and trying to rein this back in. Because I think what we're seeing here now is that we are seeing a reemergence of all those vices that have come
Mhm.
back, right? And what like, look, I'm not gonna lie, I took a lot of joy in watching a lot of liberal tears roll out when Trump was elected.
Oh, me too.
However, we have to be cognizant of this idea of a strong man that's going to come in to fix it because that's exactly what Hitler did,
Hmm.
right? And when Hitler comes to power, when he becomes the chancellor before he becomes the chancellor, um, or the Fuhrer, the churches were all about him. He's going to restore the Christian ethic back
Yes,
to our society.
and he played that
And he
too.
played that. And then by the end, and I say the end, when things are starting to really get dicey, they come in and they take off the pictures of Jesus on the wall and start hanging pictures of the Fuhrer.
Sure.
And so we need to be very careful about as we go forward here, not to be drawn to this idea of the strong man, right? Someone's going to be willing to grab that pendulum. And who grabs that pendulum is going to probably be disaster no matter who it is, from the left or the right. Because there will be certain things with the right that guys like you and I will not fit with. If we don't get with the program, that's a problem.
It can be. Yeah. No, it is a problem. It's a question in my mind because I thought about this one a lot, especially because as I begin to question the cultural myth that I live in now,
Mm-hmm.
and I distrust my own government to the
Mm-hmm.
point where I just reevaluate a lot of things.
Sure.
You for example, people like to cite that George Washington like gave up the term, after 2 terms, and he wouldn't become king, right? And they equate even to the point like Lord of the Rings, where like you give up the ring of power, thinking that the ring of power is a metaphor for power, although
Sure.
it's not actually a metaphor for
Right.
power, it's a metaphor for evil, which is different.
Right. Yep.
Um, they're not synonymous terms, by the way.
No.
And then there's another quote. I think I sent it to you a while back. I like, I pontificate a lot on a lot. It talks about. Let's see if I can find this. The heaviest penalty for declining to rule is to be ruled by someone inferior to yourself.
Right.
And so the idea being, we've all gotten really accustomed to the idea that we're all equal,
Yeah.
which the Constitution says something about equal rights, and I'm not disputing that. But at the same time, to say that we're all equal is a bull-faced lie because we're not.
You would have to go back and read um original sources. What they were saying is that all men were equal before the law, and all men were born with an equal shot. Now,
Right. Now, I'm just saying what we culturally interpret out of that seems to be kind of a parasitical.
yes, it's a different than what the founders had meant for it.
And so there are inferior people, and because righteous men won't hold power,
Yes.
people inferior to them get to hold power and wield it against everyone.
Yes. Yep.
And so Well, you say let's not fall into a strongman fallacy. I'm not disputing it, but at the same time, shoot, it would be nice to have some stronger men. That's for sure.
I get what you're saying, and let me say this: we certainly don't like one manism in our religion.
That's true. I don't.
Would you like one manism in the government?
No, I probably wouldn't.
That
The
would
main only because I wouldn't trust the human ability to, and
exactly.
so we're on the same page then. But um, I would say I would consider myself post-liberal
Okay.
in an undefined sense. In that there's things from our culture that I'm not going to throw the baby with the bathwater on, but I'm not married to egalitarianism,
Okay. So
and
so
and
what are you keeping?
and I'm still working on all of that. But I really think that political power needs to be earned in a way that we
I
talked about
agree.
earlier, like something that's traumatic, not in the sense that like let's exile the young men, to the wilderness and see if they survive, kind of a thing. But something needs to be there,
No, you and I have talked about this before. A need for a rites of passage to make a
right?
return.
And so the basically what it would need to take, looking at things from a meta political or metaphysical view, is I don't want to live in a society that orders the society from below, from the
Right.
lowest common denominator. And so, at least on the metaphysics side, a king does order society from above.
Right.
Now, you get into the debate about divine right of kings, and we're also back to the strongman thing. And I'm not advocating for that, but I would at the very least not want to order society from lower regions,
Right.
you know. And so, what do you have to do is qualify men somehow. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I think that's sound reasoning.
Yeah, I think the founders did speak on that a little bit. I'm right now teaching a course on the 5,000 year leap. And there was one
Oh, that's, yeah,
principle
I
in
know that
there.
book.
There was one principle in there where it talked about when you go to select good leaders, they should be proven, right? Now, I'm not saying they have to be proven in the military. I'm
Hmm.
not saying they have to be proven
I brought
in
that point up to
government,
my dad once, and he said that's the worst idea ever. He was in the army, right?
right?
And he's it's so interesting to me. He said the army trains most people to be mediocre,
Right. Right.
which is this interesting thought.
So I just did an episode with a guy who's not a Mormon at all, but talked about he is a God guy, right? He's very religious, but he talked about his time in the military and how much of that that'll be released in a couple of weeks here. Talked about that very thing. Um he but whether that's in business, whether that's in other leadership roles through a job, or maybe it is the military, right? Like
I
I
wouldn't
think
exclude it.
right, I wouldn't exclude it. I do believe that a man should have a proven track record, right? And if you have been in the white towers of academia, I don't think that counts, right? You have to go out and you have to scratch out
Not in the
something.
not definitely not in the sense of academia now, for sure.
No,
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 definitely
yeah,
not for sure. But I want my leaders to be intelligent, for sure.
sure,
You know,
sure.
but they're all bought.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, they're bought and paid for, and it's all done, right? So I agree with you, right? And look, I'm not a guy who believes that we don't have the ability to um, amend the Constitution. I think the founders were smart enough to give us
mm.
that right because they knew at some point, even Washington, when at the Constitutional Convention, he says something interesting. He stands up, and it's right before they're about to take the vote, the final vote. And I'm going to paraphrase this part of it, but he basically says, "Gentlemen, we've been here these many long months, suffering through the heats and being away from our families, and we've argued a lot. We have come to some conclusion and resolution." And this is where I quote Washington directly. He stands up and he says, "Let us raise a standard to which the wise and noble can repair. The event is now in God's hands." And he sits down and the vote is taken. But that statement, "Let us raise a standard to which the wise and noble can repair." He knew at the outset that it wasn't complete, it wasn't done, it wasn't perfect.
Hmm.
And he was basically saying, let's give them a foundation to work from. So I'm a guy who believes that things are still on the table, right? Now, it's going to take a massive amount of hardship, most likely, to vote in men who are willing to do the hard work of that, right? To ignore the graft that happens in Washington.
So I just ordered a book. I'm really excited for it by John Calhoun, who he was a former vice
Mm-hmm.
president of the United.
Yep.
He served under John Quincy Adams and
Yep.
Jackson.
Yep.
He's one of the only, yeah, he's one of two. I think Ford or someone else was one of the only two presidents to serve as vice presidents to serve under two different
Yep.
like parties
Yep.
or terms. But he wrote a book in the 1830s or 40s, I think, on it's called A Disquisition on Government. And he's interesting. So he was vice president for two terms. He was a senator in South Carolina multiple times. He was a secretary of war for a while. Um, and he went from being a federalist to being a states' rights activist. And he was pretty much actually a huge influential um, political um, setting political precedent for the South,
Mm-hmm.
succeeding. He had a professor at Yale or Harvard. It was really interesting. Who taught him, in his words, he said, "This is totally a tangent, right?" But he said, "I can't prove that states have a moral, or that states could prove a moral ability to secede from the union, but that they have a, but I can't say that they don't have a legal right to." It's
You know,
really interesting.
it is interesting when you get in that debate about states' rights versus federalism, right? In some ways, I would dare to say Joseph Smith was much more of a federalist than he was a states' rights guy because he recognizes in Missouri their rights aren't being protected.
That's true.
And where does he go for redress?
The federal government.
The federal government.
It's true. Yeah. No, there's definitely two sides of that coin. And so I'm excited for Calhoun because
Calhoun's
he's both sides.
Calhoun's very interesting too because in that time period,
And it's right before it's Joseph Smith's time period,
right,
right?
right,
It's that time period.
right. If we look at that time period, if you ran against the president or if you were running and you lost the presidency, you became the vice
And
president.
that's how it happened with him. Yep.
And I'll tell you what, I'm in favor of that model. Maybe
Uh,
not so much today, but maybe even the 80s, I may have been okay with that model. Now there's no way I would espouse it, but in if we could all agree on like the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, I feel like we could still do some really awesome things.
right.
But you're going to need to check the parties. And the best way I know of to check the parties is build a team of rivals.
Right.
Mm.
Well, and then at that point, you're dealing with rivals that are competing for, yeah, their vision, but they have a vision that's rooted in a shared
Yeah,
foundation,
yes. Look,
which we do not have at the moment.
I would say as late as the 1980s, for the most part, most people were like, I just want to raise my kids, have a good living, you know, live in peace, be left alone, right?
Right.
Now, I think we have factions that absolutely want to destroy everything that's been built to this point, um, including anything that's been good. And I'm not sure that you could get away with building a team of rivals right now and have it
No,
work
no.
out.
Well, there's that thought. But then there's the thought that they're all secretly buddies.
Well, that it's all
Too.
professional
And it's
wrestling.
it's
Yeah.
it's professional wrestling, and all we have is a uniparty that hates us.
Yes. Yes.
And
There.
I don't know where I stand on that
Well,
uniparty.
I don't think that could not be very far off from the truth, right? With sprinkled in there,
Yeah,
a few guys here and there who are honestly principled. Your Ben Sass,
right. What do you think of Thomas Massey? Is it
I know who he is.
he and Trump are button heads like crazy.
Yeah, I like him because he's willing to butt heads with him.
Uh-huh.
There's a few takes I don't like, but also people have to realize you're not going to like everything one guy likes,
100%.
right? And you got to be
Well, it's like
willing,
Jackson and this guy Calhoun.
right?
They they had a tough go
Yeah,
sometimes between the
and
two
and
of them.
that's healthy, right?
Yeah.
And I'm also a believer that gridlock's a good thing. I think the system was designed to be gridlocked, unless it was a very big emergency that we could all agree on, right? Like an existential threat. But I'm a fan of gridlock. because if you're gridlocked, you're not making dumb laws.
Yep.
And I think there is a certain wisdom to that. But no, we've for sure gotten ourselves to a place now, Mike, where I do feel like we've built the Tower of Babel. And it's been built through tech, it's been built through our economy, it's been
The
built
tech
through.
part's scary because it's that one's going higher and higher and higher right now,
Yes.
exponentially. But we don't need to go down that road
Oh
too.
no, no. I got some things I can talk to you about afterwards that's pretty brutal. That was a hell of a side tangent.
Yeah, I'm cool with it. I
All
hope
right.
everyone else is cool with it. I'm cool with it.
I'm cool with it. I think it's been good. Let's keep
I
going.
if they don't, yeah, either they're listening this long or they turned it off long ago. Let's
And we may just have to like get to a stopping point and do a part two.
maybe I don't know, or yeah, I don't know. We'll find out. All right, so I read the book that I couldn't grab that I was looking for before I came here. I read in there something that, so I'm gonna say what it said, but like I did some Google searches and it was like disputed that, so I don't know how trustworthy this is, but so we talked about the MIRVs earlier and how we started decommissioning those in the 90s. I think the last one was decommissioned in like 2007, let's say.
Right.
Well, the START treaty that we were under with Russia just expired, for example.
Okay.
And so we agreed to get rid of those. I don't really know if we have the infrastructure to use those now. Maybe we do. But those things like that, if you have all these warheads,
Mm-hmm.
you have more warheads than you have missiles now. Like, what do
Yeah.
you do with them? You put them in storage, right?
Right.
You can then rearm or use them again on another missile, right? Well, Joel Skousen, in his book Strategic Relocation, I believe he said that those are all stored in Utah.
Ah.
The Hill Air Force Base and like Dugway Proving Grounds.
Oh,
And so now we're talking nuclear war strategy. Like, where do you want to hit?
you want to probably take out their weapons first.
You want to take out the other guy's weapons. And so the first priority strike in nuclear doctrine is you take out the military facilities. Nuclear war isn't going to really be targeting civilian cities. And if a civilian city, if a military base, or if a strategic location for the war effort of that nation is located near a city, yeah, that city's screwed. But it's not going to be like every city's being
Right.
individually targeted, right? Well, Salt Lake and Ogden are right there with Hill Air Force Base, and so I don't know if those warheads are there, but what is for sure true is Hill Air Force Base is in charge of the ICBM program in the United States
Really.
of maintenancing and like the tech and software and especially hardware like gyroscopes,
Okay.
everything that goes into ICBMs is retrofitted through or parts are made and like they go through there. So like that's primary target number one is Hill Air Force Base. Uh, so I mentioned earlier in the podcast that the Rocky Mountains, like moving from Seattle to Montana, would like you want to do that because the Rockies will keep some of the fallout out. The problem with Salt Lake Valley, that fallout's never really leaving that valley. What
No,
do you have? Is it called the
inversion.
inversion
Yep, inversions.
in
Yeah.
there? Yeah. So there's that to wonder about, for sure. Uh, and then on top of that, the secondary target in Russian nuclear doctrine is to uh, ground impact any runways that U.S. military bombers can use to refuel. So that's Salt Lake Airport, for example. So Salt Lake, and then you have Camp Williams right there. So Salt Lake area, at bare minimum, has two primary targets and at least one or two secondary targets in a second wave attack right in that valley. Just for everyone's information. Am I advocating you leave Salt Lake? You guys can read the room. I
Somewhere there's a real estate agent in Salt Lake going, "Shut up, Michael. Shut up, Michael."
anyway, I digress from that point.
No, that's interesting to know, right?
It is
And
really interesting.
and look, I truly mean this. You have to live where the Lord tells you to live. That's the safest place for you. Um, Having said that, you should probably pray really hard about where you should live. And make sure that answer is crystal clear.
I agree. All right, so food and water in dust-tight containers are not contaminated by fallout radiation, and peeling fruits and vegetables essentially removes all fallout.
Really, just peeling them.
Just peeling them.
And see, this is why I wanted to have this conversation because there is so much BS that goes in
Oh, so much.
to this subject, right? Because quite frankly, Hollywood had to make it look good.
Sure, 100%.
I do believe that there was a coordinated effort to get Reagan to back down from challenging Russia in those days.
Sure.
And so, how do you do that? You make nuclear war look possibly way worse than what it is.
Agreed. So water from deep wells and covered reservoirs and containers would not be contaminated, and contaminated water can be made safe by filtering through earth. Like I'm assuming through a normal kind of filter system, which is in this book, but I haven't read that chapter.
Okay.
So that's good news.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, what do you think of nuclear winter?
I'm not a fan. I've been to North Dakota, and it's not quite nuclear winter, but the winter sucks. I mean,
So it's also practically a myth,
really.
by the way. Yeah. I mean, so it is interesting because I mean Soviet scientists and then our scientists did it and got different answers on like what the result would be
Interesting.
essentially. And so like but even among our guys we've gotten some different answers, but there this book has evidence that supposes like that the guys that were uh, positing a heavy nuclear winter were kind of bought
Really?
by the mads, stuff and like magazines and stuff at the time, media. Go figure. Um, but it seemed to be a really useful tool for propaganda for the Mads thing. Like just like let's blow this out of proportion so no one ever does this kind of thing.
Right.
But there was a study. So it was popularized in 1982, I guess. Studies done in 1986, however, suggest that in this theoretical scenario, the greatest temperature reductions would be in July. For a few days, the temperature would be as low as 50 degrees Fahrenheit in July. That's not really nuclear winter.
Having lived in Missouri now a couple of summers, doesn't seem
July
so
and
bad.
yeah, 50 in July doesn't sound bad, does it?
Yeah, I'm just saying there's
Now, the Soviet data said 10 below for a few weeks. I'm assuming also the same time period.
wow. That's
But maybe that's also geographical.
could be geographical.
They're different climates.
You gotta wonder how good a Russian scientist is when they're hungry because they weren't eating a lot in those days.
Yeah,
Um,
true too.
no, yeah, that's a big swing, Michael. That's like a 60-degree swing.
It is.
But I could see it being geographical.
But yeah, our environmental factors are completely different from theirs.
Yeah,
The
there.
winds, the prevailing winds, and the Gulf currents, and all
Yeah,
that. Like our environment's different than theirs would be, right?
totally. Yeah, yeah. The
So
other
maybe they just get the short end of the stick on that one. I don't know.
well, and that could be right because I don't think like America is unique because we have a wide variety of climate.
Yeah.
Russia, I don't think has that.
Yeah, well, not I mean, their landmass is so huge that I mean, yeah, you're gonna have different climates, but like when you're talking about variety in like percentage of landmass, probably not as much as ours. Like, because yeah, you have like the southern Russia by the between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea that I think is pretty warm.
Isn't it?
And then and south of Moscow, I think is probably relatively temperate, if not boreal. But then everything else is like,
Tundra,
yeah, pretty much.
cold.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a cold that ultimately did Germany in, right? I mean, going to war in the winter didn't help.
No. No. So yeah, I mean, there's areas that are, bordering the Asia, the southern border that I think would be it's gonna get cold in winter time, but it's
Right.
it's also gonna be super hot in summer, right? And I don't know if Russia or Western Russia like Moscow is humid or how, in the summer. There is some areas on the Volga River I think that's pretty swampy and humid.
Gotcha.
and that's just north of the that area between the Black Sea and the
Right.
Caspian Sea.
That makes sense. I
But it
forget
gets dang cold in winter.
forget how big Russia's is.
It's
Yeah, they're
it's
huge.
massive. But we have Gulf currents, and we have the current from Mexico and then Canada in competition with each other, and yeah, I don't know how that. I definitely wouldn't want radioactive tornadoes.
No, that doesn't sound fun.
We would have that. They wouldn't have that because America, for some reason, is like the only place on Earth that has tornadoes. Go figure.
Really
Yeah, because of the climate and the geography. Yeah,
interesting. Yeah, nuclear tornadoes. That sounds bad. That sounds like a bad sci-fi movie.
yeah, Sharknado.
Tornado.
All right. Uh, Beta particles. So you have your gamma rays, right? Which we talked.
Right.
Your general radiation, but beta particles are another byproduct. I don't know. I just thought this was interesting. Um, yeah, it's relevant. I'd say it's relevant. Distinct from gamma rays, breathing through a dust mask, towel, or cloth would give you good protection in dry, dusty, or windy areas from beta particles. They can't penetrate more than 10 feet of air or 1/8 inches of water or wood. The most consistent danger from beta particles is contaminated food or drink. If wearing thin clothing, it will take several hours before your skin gets beta burns. Prompt washing of the body with water will prevent burns, and if water is not available, scrubbing the skin. Fallout contaminated clothing should be discarded as soon as practical.
Mm-hmm.
Alpha particles are identical to the nuclei of helium atoms. 1 to 3 inches of air will stop their penetration, and it's doubtful that they can penetrate unbroken skin, and even thin clothing will stop them. Alpha particles are only harmful if the object that emits them enter the body.
Interesting.
So, yeah, the beta particles I seem to be the dust type stuff that will cover
Right.
you, and so yeah, scrub, wash, get rid of your clothes,
Which
wear a dust mask. You don't want to be breathing that stuff in.
which is what I heard, right? If you had to hike out somewhere after that initial 2 week phase,
Yeah.
what you're going to want to do is just cover your mouth and then when you get to where you want to go, burn your clothes.
hmm So, chapter 8 of this book talks about air filters and air pumps for shelters, uh, and water. Chapter 9 has food prep. Chapter 10 has, I guess, a way to make homemade dose readers, which would be handy.
Oh, that would be
Yeah. Uh,
like a Geiger
I don't
counter.
know if a dose reader is the same thing as a Geiger counter, but it's a dose meter is the what counts
It's measuring the
what
amount
counts
of rad.
the Rontgens, yeah,
Yeah.
and it's yeah, so probably is the same thing,
Hmm.
Uh, chapter so that was chapter 10 was dose readers. Surviving without doctors. There's some stuff about that in chapter 13 of
Smart.
this book. Um, there's an evacuation checklist. There's shielding for the radiation, and I'm assuming for shelters and personal shielding. Um, there's a chapter on expedient shelter furnishing. So expedient shelters are the fast shelters that you can throw up in 24 hours.
Okay. And what do those look like? What would they consist of?
Essentially, it's digging a trench, putting like logs or wood over the top, and then like a tarp, and then like covering that with earth.
That's it?
That's it. That's all you need for an expedient shelter. I mean, there's some more particular things about dimensions and so you don't get like shockwave, um, like
Oh, yeah.
like angle of entrance into the tunnel. So
Yeah.
like you don't get shockwave and like have your eardrums burst and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Right. And those are details that are in the book. But yeah, essentially it's as simple as, and that's why people in Japan who didn't know what was coming with the nukes were able to survive a third of a mile away from ground zero in a normal air raid trench.
Interesting. Because they could just get in there and cover it and you're good.
Yeah. Or it's, oh yeah,
Hmm.
yep, 100%.
Wow.
And it
A
protects
lot
you from
different than
it protects you from the blast, right? That's all that you're worried about in that instance, right? You have to worry about the fallout's a
absolutely.
separate issue. If you can afford to build a fallout shelter, that's great.
Right.
But you don't technically need to.
Right.
I think you should, personally. I'd love to have one.
Heck yeah, I saw some cool ones where you like dug a hole, put in um a shipping container.
Yeah.
and kind of went down there and spruced it up and had all your food and everything else you'd need. There are some things I'm thinking about that you'll have to figure out, like a restroom, right?
Yeah, they talked about that in the book too.
Did they?
Hmm. Yeah,
What'd they use for ventilation?
they got that. They got air pump stuff. There's a whole thing on that. See if I can flip through and take a look at it. Here's your expedient sheet, by the way. Let's happen to flip to that.
Oh,
It's got diagrams and all sorts of things.
here, let me take a picture of that. I'll just throw that up there on the show notes. You want to put this on a dating profile or anything?
Funny. Let's see, where's the air filter? It's mainly made of plywood and stuff like that, dude. That pump probably is what I'm thinking.
So, okay. So let's say this. In a house like mine where I don't have a basement, in,
Good question.
in your estimation, if I was to seal off the windows, like put like visqueen.
Is that like a tape? Is that what it is?
Visqueen would be like a vapor barrier,
Okay.
a plastic vapor barrier. If we were to put that up, based on what you've read, do you think that that is
Based on where we are in
sufficient?
relation to targets, yeah, if you had that in a pump to get like, or in a filter with fresh air to get in and keep, and like, yeah, put a barrier on your windows and your doors and stuff, yeah, you'd probably be fine.
Interesting.
Like 2 weeks, yeah, then you're good.
I still want to build a fallout shelter.
I would. Uh, so yeah, this is Appendix B, how to make and use a homemade shelter ventilating pump.
Nice. So it really is how to survive a
It is
nuclear apocalypse.
100% is. It's got all the diagrams, got stories. There was a really interesting picture of one that they did. I want to find. But here's your pictures of the bunker with the air pipe or something there going on.
Oh. So it's just open, it's just pointed down. If this is the air distillery here,
That kind of makes some sense to me.
it makes sense to me too, because if it's pointed down,
Like a candy cane for those
yeah,
who are listening
yeah,
audio wise. Yep.
that would be your intake. Yep. And then it looks like they got that little filter there. So really, you're just sticking a pipe up there, putting a little, I'm guessing, probably filter it through like earth or whatever.
Hmm.
And then, interesting.
Yeah, it's all this home. It was like super rudimentary looking. This thing. It was a plywood box with some stuff in it that was a pump, for air. So it's all super cheap even. I mean, I'm sure you could probably do more
No,
expensive
yeah.
things too if you want. But this is really like it probably has some of that too, but it's also like what can you do on short notice if
Right.
you really need to do it.
Right.
So it's completely survivable.
So what was that pretty much it?
I got a few more notes.
Yeah, let's go over those real quick.
Maybe I don't. I was kind of at the end actually. I don't know if we have enough time for that one. There was definitely, yeah. No, let's round it out, I think.
You sure?
Well, it's either that or talk about the India thing and go down that rabbit hole.
Tell you what.
But we can do that another time and just throw a
We
throwback to this.
Yeah, let's
And like
let's
because we
let's
want
do that
I
because
want to do a different podcast on another
archaeoastronomy,
which
right?
that can tie into
That
this
would
too.
tie into that fairly well, right?
Yeah.
Based on the talks we've had, I think that would tie in pretty well. So why don't we hold off on the India thing for now?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this question. After studying that book and doing your studying, what was your takeaway from a potential nuclear exchange with another country?
I mean, it's so the most interesting thing to me was that the yields of the bombs themselves have gone down. So, for example, on the nuke maps thing, you can test that 50 megaton and 100 megaton version of the big Russian bomb,
But they're not using it.
The Tsar bomber. And so that's 50 megatons, right? The ones that they had deployed. I think they tested a 101, but they never made it like for regular use. And I don't even know how big our big ones are. I think 30 megaton range was kind of where the US nukes were the biggest ones. And I don't know what we have now either. But so if the most common warhead in the Russian arsenal is 500 kilotons, it's half. So it's 1/100th of the power
Right.
of that big one. That's pretty. That's relatively. That's a big decrease,
Right.
right? Also, we've gone through like 3 different nuke treaties with Russia, and we've all de-escalated the amount of warheads we have, missiles we have in silos, and even submarines that we're allowed to keep capable.
Right.
Um, so that all seems to be good news as far as not having nuclear war, right? But as far as the book goes, I think that that was a really interesting just to see the evolution of tactics with Russia. Um, I think some of the more interesting stuff is what we talked about with the world order changing.
Yeah.
Because if the world order is not anchored in a shared desire for monetary increase,
What's the thing holding us together?
that's my question. I don't know.
Yeah.
And at the same, I'm not arguing that it shouldn't go because I hate it.
Right.
But then that would be the opening for conflict potentially would be
Yeah.
that at the same time. So it's a two-edged sword
Let me ask you this:
potentially.
do you feel better or worse about your chance of surviving nuclear war after doing all this?
If I were, I do have plans to invest in some of those projects, 100%. I feel pretty good. It makes good common sense, and I think I'd rather be prepared than not prepared.
Right. Yeah.
And especially in Salt, that's the big sword hanging over my head is Salt Lake is especially especially for our people, that's target number one, ironically. You
Yeah.
know, besides I mean there's other Air Force bases and stuff too that are equal targets, but like that's not where our people are,
No.
right? You have certain bunkers and things like you have like the strategic air command type stuff that
Right.
are pretty cool, which we didn't talk about, like Cheyenne Mountain. There's
Yeah.
The Notch, which is in like Massachusetts. You have the main SAC in Offutt Air Force Base in Oklahoma. No, Nebraska. Sorry. Then there's an old one. I'm not sure if it's decommissioned. Like it's called Raven Rock. It's out by DC
Yep.
somewhere.
Yep.
I don't know if they're still using that one or not.
I can tell you they don't let you get close to it still, or at least they didn't back in '05.
You ever watch Terminator 3 where they go, he survives by going into one of the
Yep.
decommissioned,
Yep.
you know,
I did. Yeah.
bunkers in Arizona, right? Yeah.
The documentary Terminator. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's looking more. Well, dude, this was fun. I feel like the audience got to see what it is you and I talk about when we're not when we're not on the mic. So they got a little behind the scenes. Anything else you want to finish up with?
Probably not. It's getting late.
It's getting late.
I'll be back later. How about that?
We'll do it later. Bye, everybody.